Chapter 455. Healing. Now, Yi Xian didn't think about anything else. He just wanted to have a good rest. It was too tiring. This time, he really felt exhausted. He didn't even have the strength to move a finger. It could be said that this battle was the most enjoyable battle he had ever had. Carefree and unrestrained. This time, he had a lot of insights, but at the same time, he realized that there were too many shortcomings. If he didn't fight with a real powerhouse, no matter how much he cultivated, it would be limited. He couldn't build a car behind closed doors. However, at this moment, he didn't want to think so much. He just wanted to lie down. Not far away, Zhou Xingxing walked in front of the man in green shirt. At this time, Sky Sha and Earth Sha appeared on both sides of the man in green shirt. Zhou Xingxing glanced at the man in green shirt. Monsieur? The man in green shirt smiled slightly. I'm sorry to disappoint you. I'm not. Zhou Xingxing was silent. After a moment, Zhou Xingxing said softly, what a pity. The man in green shirt smiled and said, unfortunately, you can't fight with him? Zhou Xingxing nodded. The man in green shirt smiled lightly, you should be glad. Zhou Xingxing said calmly, is that so? The man in green shirt smiled and didn't say anything else. He slowly closed his eyes. Zhou Xingxing looked at Sky Sha and Earth Sha, who's next? Sky Sha stood up. Soon, Earth Sha brought the man in green shirt to one side, and the war army and the others quickly brought Yi Xian to the other side. Sky Sha didn't say any nonsense. He rushed forward and threw a punch at Zhou Xingxing. The powerful fist force was like a stormy sea, making it hard for people to breathe. Zhou Xingxing was expressionless. He took out the iron spear behind him with his right hand. The next moment, he rushed forward and stabbed with the spear. The spear was like a dragon. Boom! The two of them separated as soon as they touched, but soon, the two of them collided again. The second battle began. On the side, Yi Xian lay quietly on the ground. Now, his mind was filled with the scene of the battle with the man in green shirt. On the other side, in a place where no one could see, Mr. Bai stood quietly on a leaf. Behind him was a Gui. Mr. Bai's gaze was fixed on Yi Xian. At this time, a Gui suddenly said, he is a promising talent, but his edge is too sharp. It would be better if he could be more reserved. Mr. Bai laughed. It's rare to catch a Gui's eye. A Gui said in a low voice, before this, I thought he was just lucky and had that precious treasure. That's why he was able to come this far. But just now, this person has the guts and determination to fight without fear of death. I like it. Mr. Bai smiled and said, then will you train him? A Gui shook his head. I'm not suitable for him. Mr. Bai shook his head. You are suitable. A Gui looked at Mr. Bai. Mr. Bai said softly, his sword Dao is not the mainstream sword Dao. His flying sword was more suitable to be used as an assassin. It was more suitable for killing. His sword Dao can be combined with your killing Dao. A Gui was silent. Mr. Bai said again, he still has many areas to improve, but he can't see it himself. Or rather, what he can see is limited. With your guidance, he can become stronger. A Gui nodded. I understand. But why don't you teach him yourself, sir? Mr. Bai said softly, his temperament is not compatible with mine. I'm afraid I'll kill him. A Gui was speechless. In the distance, the battle continued. Tian Sha and Zhou Xingxing could be said to be evenly matched. Neither had the upper hand. This time, both sides chose to fight one-on-one. Therefore, the war army and the others did not make a move. Not long after, a voice sounded from afar. Stand down. As this voice appeared, Tian Sha suddenly stopped and retreated to Di Sha's side. As this voice appeared, Tian Sha suddenly stopped and retreated to Di Sha's side. Everyone looked over. 1,000 feet away, a man stood there. The man was wearing a plain robe with his right hand behind his back. He had an elegant scholar's aura. And beside the man, a black Qilin crouched. Seeing this person, Zhou Xingxing frowned. Monsieur? The plain-robed man did not answer Zhou Xingxing. He looked up into the distance. On the other side, Mr. Bai frowned slightly because the plain-robed man was looking at him. The plain-robed man smiled. You must be the famous Mr. Bai. Mr. Bai took a step forward. When this step landed, he was already in front of the plain-robed man and the others. Mr. Bai looked at the plain-robed man. Soon, he frowned again because he could not see through the man in front of him. The plain-robed man smiled. Rumor has it that Mr. Bai fought his way to my Moke clan's gate and almost broke through my Moke clan. I have admired you for a long time. Mr. Bai said indifferently, you are Moke clan's Monsieur. The plain-robed man nodded. Yes. Mr. Bai looked at the black Qilin beside Monsieur. At this moment, the black Qilin suddenly raised its head and looked at Mr. Bai. Its eyes were filled with hostility and it was about to rush towards Mr. Bai. At this time, Monsieur patted the black Qilin's head lightly. The latter immediately climbed down. Mr. Bai looked deeply at Monsieur. Black Qilin is an ancient demon beast from the foreign land. It specializes in killing. It actually recognized you as its master. Monsieur smiled. I am friends with it. As he spoke, he looked at Yi Xian who was lying on the ground not far away and said softly, is he the Yi Xian who has the supreme treasure? As he spoke, he looked at the green-robed man on the ground. To be able to fight with Sua Qing like this, he is amazing. Mr. Bai looked at Monsieur for a long time. Finally, he turned around and left. Back to the Great Wall. The war army and the others hurriedly carried Yi Xian and followed. Zhou Xingxing was a little unwilling, but in the end, he chose not to disobey Mr. Bai. At this time, Monsieur suddenly said, Mr. Bai. Mr. Bai stopped in his tracks. Monsieur smiled. The Moke clan will not fail this time. No one can stop us. Mr. Bai said calmly, I'll wait for you. With that, he disappeared. In the distance, Monsieur looked at the man named Sua Qing on the ground. Are you all right? Sua Qing said softly, I'm all right. That person's sword is so fast. Monsieur nodded slightly. Even you can't dodge it. Naturally, it's very fast. As he spoke, he looked at Tian Sha and Di Sha. If you encounter this person in the future, be careful. The two nodded. Tian Sha hesitated for a moment and then said, Big brother, when are we going to the Great Wall of Burial Skies? Monsieur smiled. There's no hurry. The Moke clan has been waiting for 1,000 years. A little longer doesn't matter. Tian Sha nodded and said no more. At this time, an old man suddenly appeared beside Monsieur. The old man said, Young master, this time, some people from the alien domain suddenly came to this star sector. Their target might be that swordsman. And they don't want to go head-on against the never-ending star sector, so they want to temporarily ally with the Moke clan. However, their target is only that swordsman. Monsieur said softly, How are the people who came? The old man said in a low voice, 2 of them are equivalent to Tian Sha and Di Sha, and 1, Monsieur looked at the old man. The old man said softly, I'm afraid they are only second to you, young master. Monsieur smiled slightly. Interesting. As he spoke, he looked at the end of the horizon and said softly, that Weiyang Palace Lord is still very strong. These people from the alien domain are still very wary of her. Weiyang Palace Lord. Hearing this, the old man's face suddenly turned serious. Only the experts of the older generation understood how terrifying this woman was. At this time, Monsieur said softly, Let's go. Let's go meet those geniuses from the alien domain. With that, he turned and left. On the other side, Mr. Bai suddenly said, Ask Shui Bai to come back. Agui quietly left. Burial Sky Great Wall. Yi Xian lay in the stone house. After consuming the snow lotus that Zhou Xingxing gave him, his body began to recover rapidly. Yi Xian said softly, "Second floor guru, are you there?" After a moment of silence, the second floor guru said, "What's up?" Yi Xian smiled bitterly. Before this, I thought I was invincible among my peers. Before this, he had rarely encountered opponents of the same level. The only one who could possibly be an opponent was Enlancio. And Enlancio also seemed to have a special physique. Yi Ling also had a special physique. At this time, the second floor guru suddenly said, "No one is invincible among their peers. You have to remember that in the vast universe, there is no strongest, only stronger." Yi Xian nodded. Understood. The second floor guru said again, "Compared to the person you fought, the man who appeared later was really terrifying. This person is outstanding even among the Divine Clan and Nether Clan." Yi Xian frowned slightly. "That man in plain robe?" The second floor guru said, "Well, if you meet this person in the future, you better be careful." Yi Xian nodded slightly. He now had a taste of the strength of the Moke clan. However, he did not have the slightest fear. On the contrary, this stimulated his fighting spirit. There were countless geniuses, and he, Yi Xian, wanted to occupy a place among them. The second floor guru said again, "And that black Qilin beside him, it is a rare ancient beast. This kind of beast eats evil thoughts and devours hearts. Its bloodline is not inferior to the emperor dog. Very strong. Very strong." Yi Xian was silent for a moment. After a moment, he seemed to think of something and asked, "Second floor guru, what about you? What bloodline do you have?" He did not forget that this second floor guru was also a demonic beast. The second floor guru said, "When did I tell you that I am a demonic beast?" Yi Xian was stunned. "Aren't you a demonic beast?" The second floor guru said, "Get lost." Yi Xian was speechless. At this time, a black shadow suddenly appeared in the stone house. Yi Xian quickly stood up. This person was Agui. Agui said, "My Tao is the Tao of killing, the Tao of ghosts. Are you willing to learn from me?" Yi Xian was stunned. Agui asked again, "Are you not willing?" Yi Xian came to himself and said hurriedly, "Yes." Agui nodded slightly. "Follow me." After that, he left the stone house with Yi Xian. After a while, Agui brought Yi Xian to a mountain range. Agui said, "Do you know your weakness?" Yi Xian shook his head. Agui said, "Attack me." Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, then said, "This isn't too good." Then, he suddenly put two fingers on his right hand together. The next moment, a ray of sword light quietly appeared in front of Agui. Chi! The sound of air being pierced was heard. Agui appeared behind Yi Xian and grabbed Yi Xian's shoulder with one hand. Yi Xian was instantly immobilized. At this time, Agui lifted Yi Xian and slammed him to the ground. Bang! The ground cracked. Yi Xian was speechless. Chapter 456. Bam Bam. Agui raised Yi Xian and smashed him around, leaving craters in the ground. Yi Xian was lying on the ground in a second. Agui was standing not far from him. Agui said, "Let me teach you a lesson. Don't play tricks in front of a true expert. Of course, it's not that you can't play tricks, but strength is the key. Without strength, all tricks are useless. Do you understand?" Yi Xian smiled bitterly. "Actually, I'm a reasonable person. If you have anything to say, you can tell me. I'll listen." Agui shook his head, "Suffer a little pain, and you'll learn from it." Yi Xian was speechless. Agui said, "Get up." Yi Xian stood up quickly. He didn't want to be beaten. Agui said, "You're a swordsman. My Tao is different from yours, but you can learn from some of my advantages." Now, attack me. Yi Xian didn't dare to underestimate him. He rushed forward and slashed down. Draw the sword to decide life and death. The sword slashed down, and the space shook. However, the sword was caught by 2 fingers. Yi Xian's face darkened. Ague said, the essence of this sword is strong, but in your hands, it's weak. Do you know why? Yi Xian shook his head. Ague said, when you fought with the man in green, the sword's power was at least several times stronger than now. Do you know why? Yi Xian said, if I couldn't take it, I would have died. So, I tried my best. Ague said, not only that, your sword had courage, determination, and fighting spirit. But now, your sword has nothing. Yi Xian was silent. Ague said, your sword has great potential, but it depends on whether you can unleash it. Come, continue to attack now. Treat me as your enemy. Enemy. Yi Xian nodded slightly and sheathed his sword. After a moment of silence, he drew his sword and slashed. Draw the sword to decide life and death. The sword descended, but it was still easily caught by Ague. Yi Xian shook his head. I can't. Ague was silent for a moment, then he said softly, I understand. Yi Xian looked at Ague, and Ague said softly, the power of your sword depends on your rage. The angrier you are, the more you want to kill, the more powerful your sword will be. Normally, the power of this sword is inferior to that of your flying sword. It should be said that the difference is huge. Yi Xian fell silent. Actually, he had also discovered this problem. This was because this sword was sometimes especially strong, and sometimes it didn't seem very strong. Ague said, your sword has a high upper limit and endless potential, but it's related to your rage, so it's useless most of the time. Yi Xian was speechless. Ague said, let's talk about your flying sword. Your flying sword is fast enough, and it's strong enough. Yi Xian quickly said, Senior, do you think my flying sword is strong enough? Ague said, do you think it's strong? Yi Xian hesitated, then he said, I think it's okay. Ague hooked his finger, come, hit me. Yi Xian was speechless. Ague said, strength, speed, your flying sword is okay, barely qualified. But what you lack now is awareness, combat awareness. Also, because of your sword, your close combat ability is weak. If your opponent fights you in close combat, you will be at a disadvantage. Disadvantage in close combat. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. Before this, he always thought he was strong in close combat. However, from the previous battle, he knew he was not good enough in close combat, especially the sword skill, life and death sword draw. Its power was related to his rage, it was too unstable. Ague said, treat me as an enemy. Come, continue. Yi Xian nodded, then he charged at Ague with his sword. When he reached in front of Ague, he swung his sword down. The sword was fast, but Ague was faster. Before the sword landed, Ague was already behind Yi Xian. Chi! Yi Xian's sword missed. Ague was already behind Yi Xian. Yi Xian said, you're faster than me. Ague appeared in front of Yi Xian. Is that all? Yi Xian looked at Ague, Senior, please enlighten me. Ague said, first, the moment you came, your movement told me you were going to attack. In that instant, I had already thought of several ways to deal with it. Second, you're not as fast as me. Yi Xian was speechless. Ague said, before you're faster than him, it's best not to let him know what you're going to do. For example, your flying sword could hurt the man in green because Qing didn't know when you were going to attack. Then, he looked at Yi Xian, what you need to do now is, after you attack, what's your next step? Next step. Yi Xian was silent. At that moment, he understood Ague's meaning. What Ghosty meant was to look 3 steps before taking 1 step, or even 10 steps before taking them. Ague said, come, continue. Yi Xian nodded, and once again, he drew his sword. In the following time, Yi Xian and Agui started a crazy sparring session. During the sparring session, Yi Xian was getting more and more worried because Agui seemed to know what he was going to do next. For the first time, he felt like he was completely suppressed. Only when he used the flying sword could he recover a little. However, after using the flying sword, he was still suppressed. At night, Agui said, "Think about it yourself." After saying that, he turned around and disappeared. On the ground, Yi Xian lay quietly. His mind was filled with the battle with Agui. Agui didn't use any sword skills, he just used pure strength, speed, and consciousness to suppress him. Especially his battle consciousness. At that moment, he really saw how terrifying Agui was. This ghostie was definitely someone who had experienced countless life and death battles. His opponent's battle consciousness was too terrifying. This time, Yi Xian realized his problem. In terms of martial arts and swordsmanship, he was still a greenhorn. Yi Xian took a deep breath, stood up, and started to practice his swordsmanship. He practiced according to the images in his mind. On the other side, where Yi Xian couldn't see, Mr. Bai was looking at him, and behind Mr. Bai was Agui. Agui said, "He only lacks the improvement in battle. As for his swordsmanship, I can't guide him in other aspects." Mr. Bai said softly, "This is enough." After saying that, he turned around and left. Agui followed. On the way, Mr. Bai said, "Where's Bai?" Agui said, "I've informed him, he's on his way back." Mr. Bai nodded, "The palace master and the others will be here soon." Agui said in a deep voice, "Is the Moke clan planning something big?" Mr. Bai said softly, "They can't wait any longer." Agui said softly, "All right, let's put an end to this." As he spoke, he paused slightly, and then said, "The people from the other side are still eyeing that brat. These people from the other side aren't prepared to let the matter rest." Mr. Bai said, "There are still people spying on us?" Agui nodded, "A few." Mr. Bai said, "Kill them." Agui nodded, and quietly left. Mr. Bai glanced at Yi Xian in the distance, and then left. After dawn, Yi Xian quietly lay on the ground. After a night of practice, he found that he had learned a lot, especially in terms of battle. In particular, sparring with Ghostie had allowed him to understand many things, especially the finer details. Apart from that, he also gained something, the flying sword. After sparring with Agui, he knew better when it was best to use his flying sword. The timing of the sword was very important. All in all, this battle with the man in green and the practice with Agui had helped him improve. Yi Xian was about to continue practicing, when suddenly, a voice came from the prison pagoda. "Brother, brother." Yi Xian was stunned, and in the next moment, he entered the prison pagoda. Inside the pagoda, Yi Xian saw Yi Ling, and Yi Ling threw herself into Yi Xian's arms, hugging Yi Xian tightly. Feeling the tears on his chest, Yi Xian smiled, but soon, the smile turned into tears. Yi Ling. She was the most important person in his life. At this moment, Soul's voice suddenly sounded, "Young lord, she is still very weak, she must enter my body to recuperate for a while, in case there is a problem with her soul in the future." Yi Xian hurriedly looked at the sword Soul. "She has not fully recovered?" Soul said, "Yes, her soul is still a little weak, she needs to recuperate." Yi Xian nodded, and then looked at Yi Ling. Yi Ling grinned, "Brother, it's good to see you." Yi Xian gently wiped the tears on Yi Ling's face. "This time, I promise you, I will never let you get hurt again." Yi Ling said softly, "Brother, I want to become strong, very strong." Saying so, she looked at Yi Xian. "We brother and sister want to become strong together, okay?" Yi Xian smiled, "Of course." After chatting with Yi Ling for a while, he forced Yi Ling to enter the soul-suppressing sword. Because he found that Yi Ling's face began to pale, the situation was not good. After Yi Ling entered the soul-suppressing sword, Yi Xian continued to cultivate. "Sister. I must protect my sister. And to protect my sister, I must have great strength. Become strong. Cultivate like crazy." In the vast starry sky, a ray of sword light passed through. Wrapped in the sword light was a sword, this sword shuttling through the endless starry sky. It was shuttling through the starry sky, so the star field it crossed was very large. After an unknown amount of time, the sword suddenly stopped, turned around, and changed direction. The next moment, it was already at the end of the starry sky. After a while, it came in front of a black hole. It directly entered the strange black hole, and when it reappeared, it was already in another star field. In the starry sky, a swordsman in a white robe seemed to sense something. He stopped. Chapter 457. As soon as the middle-aged man turned around, a sword appeared in front of him. Seeing the sword, the middle-aged man was slightly surprised. "It's you?" The sword trembled slightly as if it was asking something. The middle-aged man shook his head. "I haven't seen her." The sword trembled and let out a low hum. The middle-aged man asked, "Why the rush?" The sword trembled as if it was trying to express something. A moment later, the middle-aged man said softly, "That tower." As he spoke, he pondered for a moment. After a while, he said softly, "Go find her." The sword did not leave. Instead, it stayed where it was. The middle-aged man smiled. "I'll take care of the tower." Hearing that, the sword turned around and disappeared at the end of the Milky Way. On the spot, the middle-aged man turned around and looked at the end of the Milky Way. At the end of the Milky Way, he saw a galaxy bridge that spanned across the Milky Way. At the end of the bridge, there were a few extremely powerful auras. After a moment of silence, the middle-aged man disappeared. At the same time, a voice resounded on the distant galaxy bridge. "Does anyone want to fight?" Burial Sky Great Wall. Between the mountains, a series of air-piercing sounds could be heard. Yi Xian was still training with a Gui. During this period of time, he had been training with a Gui every day. A Gui did not teach him anything and only sparred with him. During this period of time, he could be said to have improved by leaps and bounds. Especially his close combat ability. His reaction speed was at least twice as strong as before. It did not matter, because if his reaction was slow or his moves were stupid, he would be beaten up by a Gui. Meanwhile, a Gui's fists were like iron hammers. Every punch could make him wish he was dead. Under such circumstances, his improvement was naturally very fast. Because he could not make the same mistake twice. Otherwise, he would be beaten up even worse. To Yi Xian, he was in pain and happy at the same time. Because he could clearly feel that he was changing, especially in terms of combat. When to draw his sword, when to retreat, when to advance. Just like that, half a month later. On this morning, a Gui arrived before Yi Xian once more. Yi Xian suddenly drew his sword, and a strand of light silently flashed at the instant he drew his sword. At this time, a Gui suddenly disappeared in front of him. When she appeared again, she was behind him. However, at this moment, the sword that Yi Xian was about to slash forward suddenly turned around and slashed downward. It should be said that his sword was meant to slash backwards. The sword slashed down. Bang! With a muffled sound, an afterimage appeared several feet away. It was a Gui. A Gui whispered, "A diversion." Not bad. Yi Xian grinned and was about to speak when a Gui suddenly disappeared. Bang! Yi Xian was sent flying hundreds of feet away before crashing heavily onto a boulder. A Gui walked before Yi Xian. "Did I make you relax?" Yi Xian was speechless. A Gui whispered, "Remember, in this place, you must always be on guard. Also, be prepared to be killed." Yi Xian slowly got up and whispered, "Senior, is the Moke clan going to do something?" A Gui nodded. "During this time, many people from Neverending Starfield will come here. You have to be prepared because the Moke clan might be up to something big." Yi Xian nodded slightly. "Okay." A Gui turned around and left. On the spot, Yi Xian sat cross-legged and took out a fruit. It was a kiwi fruit. He had robbed it from the war army and Baldy. After coming here, because of the Fatty Tang incident, the three of them had almost forgotten about it. Strengthen the body. His body had been tempered by the dragon blood, so it was very good. However, compared to the people here, especially the war army and the others, there was still a gap. Compared to Tian Sha, the gap was huge. Now, he had to do everything he could to improve his strength in all aspects. Yi Xian swallowed the kiwi fruit. Soon, a pure energy began to spread from his body. Soon, this energy was quickly absorbed by his body. Comfortable. This was how he felt now. But soon, this comfortable feeling turned into heat, as if there was a fire burning. Time passed little by little. About 4 hours later, Yi Xian stood up. At this moment, all of his clothes had been reduced to ashes. Yi Xian looked down at his body. At this moment, his skin had undergone some wonderful changes. It worked. Yi Xian was delighted. He took out another kiwi fruit and swallowed it. He did not swallow all of it. After all, some of it belonged to the war army and Baldy. While Yi Xian swallowed the kiwi fruit, outside Buried Sky City, a man suddenly came to the city. The man was wearing a long cloth robe and held a long saber in his right hand. After arriving at the city, he looked up at Buried Sky Great Wall and stomped his right foot. Boom! The ground shook violently. At the same time, a voice suddenly sounded like thunder. Yi Xian, come out and fight. Yi Xian. Soon, the entire Buried Sky Great Wall shook. The war army and the others all appeared on the city wall. Yi Xian. In the field, everyone glanced around and did not see Yi Xian. The war army said, I'll go find him. After saying that, he turned around and disappeared not far away. The Moke clan and Neverending Starfield often challenged each other, and both sides had always followed this rule, which was to fight one-on-one. When two people fought one-on-one, no one could intervene. All these years, neither side had broken the rule. They would not break the rule either, because both sides had their own pride. Of course, if they felt that they could not win, they could choose not to go down. Not long after, the war army brought Yi Xian to the city wall. Yi Xian looked down. He did not know the man below, and this man was not the man in the green robe from the Moke clan or the Heaven Fiend and Earth Fiend. He might not be from the Moke clan. Yi Xian guessed. At that moment, the war army beside him said in a low voice, Brother Yi, you can choose not to go down, but I still suggest that you go down. All these years, whenever the Moke clan came to challenge us, we never backed down. At that moment, the man below suddenly looked up at Yi Xian. He gave Yi Xian a thumbs up, but the next moment, the thumbs turned downward. Yi Xian's figure trembled, and he appeared in front of the man. The man slowly clenched his right hand, and a powerful aura suddenly swept out from his body. Sage Realm. The man grinned and was about to attack, but at that moment, Yi Xian suddenly said, What a powerful aura. I have never encountered such a powerful aura. You are definitely not from the Moke clan. The Moke clan would not have such a monstrous genius like you. Hearing that, the man was stunned, and then he laughed, You guessed right. I am not from the Moke clan, I am. At that moment, the man's face changed, and he suddenly put his hands together in front of him. Boom! An explosion suddenly rang out. As soon as the explosion resounded, the surroundings suddenly fell silent. Not far away, Yi Xian turned and left. Behind Yi Xian, blood slowly flowed out from the man's brow. The man stared at Yi Xian, You. Are you playing with fire? As soon as he said that, he fell straight down. The surroundings were silent. He died just like that. Yi Xian returned to the city wall, and the war army's throat rolled. Brother Yi, Yi Xian smiled slightly, and he flicked his finger, and a storage ring fell in front of the war army. This is the kiwi fruit, yours and Baldy's are inside. After that, he turned and left. The war army took the storage ring, and he glanced at the man's body below, still unable to recover. Not to mention the war army, even the important people on the city wall had not recovered. Because until now, they did not know when Yi Xian made his move. On the other side, on the city wall, Mr. Bai looked down quietly. You taught him? Behind Mr. Bai, Agui was silent for a moment, and then said, how could I know such a dirty trick? Mr. Bai shook his head slightly. It's different from the swordsman I have seen. Agui was speechless. At this time, Mr. Bai said again, the people from the foreign lands have joined forces with the Moke clan. Agui nodded. The geniuses from the foreign lands have entered the Moke clan, and from the looks of it, their target is that kid. Mr. Bai said softly, the people from the foreign lands don't follow the rules. You should pay attention during this time, in case they do something desperate. Agui nodded, and quietly retreated. After Agui left, Mr. Bai hesitated for a moment, and then turned and disappeared not far away. In the mountains, Yi Xian, who was practicing his sword, suddenly turned around, and not far from him, Mr. Bai stood quietly. Yi Xian quickly bowed slightly. Greetings, Mr. Bai. For the person in front of him, he still respected him, because if it was not for him, he might have died in the hands of that group of strong people. Mr. Bai nodded slightly. I noticed, you are in the levitation state. Yi Xian nodded. Mr. Bai said softly, your real state is not the levitation state. Are you cultivating backwards? Yi Xian said, yes. Mr. Bai asked, why? Yi Xian said, because I realized that I have not fully understood every state. Mr. Bai took a deep look at Yi Xian. Did someone tell you this, or did you discover it yourself? Yi Xian said, I discovered it myself. Mr. Bai said softly, walk with me. As he spoke, he turned around and walked not far away. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, and then followed. On the way, Mr. Bai was silent for a moment, and then he said, the man in green who fought with you earlier is called Zhuqing. He has an innate spiritual body, and he is in the sage state, almost the complete sage state. Yi Xian looked at Mr. Bai. Innate spiritual body? Mr. Bai nodded. It is very difficult to kill. Do you remember the situation when he used a knife? Yi Xian said, I remember. Mr. Bai said, he gathered all the living things in the world. This is something that only the manifestation state can do, but he did it easily. Yi Xian said in a low voice, what are you trying to tell me, sir? Mr. Bai said softly, you are very outstanding, but there are many people who are equally outstanding, especially the Moke clan. This is a clan that I admire. Yi Xian was stunned. You admire the Moke clan? Mr. Bai stopped, and only then did Yi Xian realize that they had arrived in front of a tomb. Mr. Bai said, the person buried inside is a member of the Moke clan. As he spoke, his voice became soft. That year, Palace Master, Old Gao, and I killed our way into the Moke clan. In that battle, we almost completely destroyed the Moke clan. But the person in the tomb in front of us stopped us. In that battle, he brought the 12 generals of the Moke clan, and the 12 of them, including him, all blew themselves up, one after another. Chapter 458. Self-destruction. Yi Xian was silent. He felt like a tide was surging in his heart. He hadn't seen the scene, but he could imagine how tragic it must have been in the Moke clan. Mr. Bai said softly, the most terrifying thing about the Moke clan is that they have faith and courage. Then, he turned to Yi Xian. This is exactly what the never-ending Starfield lacks. Yi Xian hesitated and said, Sir, allow me to say something childish. Can't we sit down and talk? Mr. Bai smiled. Not childish. We thought about it back then. Unfortunately, some things can't be negotiated. Yi Xian was confused. Why? Mr. Bai laughed and said, you have a treasure on you, and some people want your treasure. Do you think you can negotiate with them? Yi Xian was silent. Mr. Bai continued, in this world, there are many times when one cannot do as they please. Most of the time, there is no right or wrong, only different standpoints. Then, He took out a wine bottle and poured it in front of the grave. Then, he turned and walked away. Yi Xian followed him. On the way, Mr. Bai said, "Do you know why many powerful forces didn't attack you or rob you of your treasure when you were in the never-ending starfield?" Yi Xian shook his head. Mr. Bai said softly, "The palace lord suppressed those forces. She asked you to come here to protect you. She was also afraid that you would stir up conflict between the forces in Never-Ending City." Palace Lord. Yi Xian said, "I don't know her." Mr. Bai smiled. "Maybe she knows you." Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. "Maybe." Mr. Bai continued walking while Yi Xian followed slowly. After a while, Mr. Bai stopped and smiled. "I almost forgot." As he spoke, he pointed at a large tree that was 300 meters away. "From here to there, 300 meters, 300 meters. Let me see how fast your sword is." Yi Xian thought for a moment. Then, he put his fingers together. A leaf fell from the tree 1,000 feet away. Mr. Bai said softly, "The extreme of qi, the extreme of space. Your sword is indeed fast among your peers, but it's not enough. You can be faster." Yi Xian bowed. "Please enlighten me, sir." Mr. Bai said, "Soul." Then he looked at Yi Xian. Above that is the divine soul level. This level focuses on the soul and mind energy. You have just come into contact with these two kinds of energy. You haven't fully grasped them yet, have you? Yi Xian nodded. He was impressed. Mr. Bai saw through him with one look. He had just started to study the divine soul and mind power. Mr. Bai chuckled. "Zhuo Qing's talent might not be higher than yours, but there's something you don't have. When he's cultivating, there's always someone from the Moke tribe who'll help him clear up his doubts. Take the divine soul for example. An ordinary person might need 3 to 4 years to understand it. However, they only need 1 day to be guided." He suddenly pressed one hand on Yi Xian's shoulder as soon as he finished speaking. Then he lifted Yi Xian up slightly. Yi Xian's soul was separated from his body directly. Yi Xian, who had become a soul, was stunned. He panicked because he realized that he had no power at all. Mr. Bai said softly, "Under normal circumstances, a human soul is very fragile. It can't leave the body easily. Otherwise, the soul will be destroyed by the various energies in this world. However, you are special because your soul is unusually strong." Yi Xian looked at Mr. Bai. "Sir, after my soul is separated from my body, Mr. Bai said, your soul is still your soul. You are still you. Your ability hasn't disappeared. If you don't believe me, you can try." Yi Xian nodded and opened his palm. Soon, a sort of energy quietly condensed in his palm. In the next moment, he opened his palm and the sword of energy suddenly disappeared. 100 feet away, the tree was pierced by a ray of sword light. However, it was a little slow. Yi Xian looked at Mr. Bai. Mr. Bai said softly, "You are only using your soul and mind power now. Therefore, the speed of your sword is not as fast as when your body and soul are fused. What you need to do now is to properly cultivate your soul power and spiritual power, and cultivate them separately. Because if they are not separated, your body can be said to be a kind of restriction for them." Yi Xian said softly, "I understand." Mr. Bai said, "Don't worry and cultivate. No one will disturb you here." With that, he turned and left. Yi Xian began to cultivate where he was. After Mr. Bai walked to the other side, a Gui appeared behind him. A Gui said in a low voice, "Sir, you want to nurture him?" Mr. Bai nodded. Although Zhou Xingxing is not weaker than Zhuo Qing, he needs to deal with Tian Sha and Di Sha. As for Zhuo Qing, he can only come. A Gui said, "That Immerse, yeah," Mr. Bai said softly, "I can't see through this person." A Gui said in a low voice, "What are the chances of Bai Yi winning against him?" Mr. Bai said, 40%, maybe even lower. Ague's face changed slightly. Why? Mr. Bai said, because he has an evil Kirin with him. This beast eats evil thoughts and devours people's hearts. Its combat power is not weaker than a manifestation realm expert. Moreover, this beast is still in its infancy. If it grows up and becomes an adult, as he said, he shook his head. I don't know how he tamed this beast. Ague was silent. At this time, Mr. Bai said, if she is still here, Ague was silent. She was the most monstrous existence in the Great Wall of Burial Sky. Even the painter was in awe of her and wanted to take her as his disciple. Unfortunately, don't worry too much. Trust Bai Yi. With that, he turned and left. Ague turned and looked at Yi Xian, who was still practicing his sword. Why do I trust this kid more? As he said, he shook his head and turned to leave. In the distance, Yi Xian began to use his soul to cultivate crazily. After his soul was separated from his body, he found that there was indeed something different. That was, his divine sense and mental strength were much stronger than when he had a physical body. However, his overall strength was not as strong as when he had a body. Only his soul and spiritual power were stronger. Moreover, when he did not have a body, he always felt empty and a little unsteady. As he practiced, a thought suddenly appeared in Yi Xian's mind. He suddenly opened his right hand and the next moment, the soul-quelling sword appeared in his hand. The moment he held the soul-quelling sword, Yi Xian suddenly felt as if he had taken a tranquilizer. His whole body was extremely calm. Not only that, but he also felt that there was a continuous flow of soul power from the soul-quelling sword in his hand towards him. Yi Xian hurriedly asked, Little Soul, this is? Little Soul said, Young Master, this is the soul power that I devoured. This soul power can be used by Young Master. Hearing this, Yi Xian was stunned. What did this mean? It meant that he had a continuous flow of soul power to devour. And by devouring this soul power, his soul could become stronger. Meanwhile, Little Soul said, Young Master, it's best that you don't absorb too much. These souls aren't pure souls. If you absorb too much, then Young Master might develop negative emotions. In other words, your personality will split. At that time, the situation will become very serious. Yi Xian asked, How serious? Little Soul fell silent for a moment and then said, It might cause Young Master to have multiple personalities and thoughts. Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression became serious. Little Soul said, Of course, it's fine as long as Young Master doesn't absorb them without restraint. With Young Master's current realm and strength, he can absorb 10,000 souls at most. After he absorbs these souls, Young Master's soul power will become even stronger. Besides that, if Young Master holds me in his soul form, then he'll be able to bring forth my strength better. However, if he doesn't have a body to rely on, then Young Master's soul power won't be very strong. Alas, this is a contradiction. Yi Xian fell silent for a moment, and then he said, Is there a perfect way? Little Soul said, There is. When Young Master's soul has been cultivated to a certain extent, then it would be as strong as his body, and they would attain a perfect balance. Unfortunately, Young Master's current state is utterly insufficient to accomplish this. Yi Xian said softly, How would I know if I don't try? As soon as he finished speaking, Yi Xian started to devour the souls within the sword soul. Most of these souls were once his enemies, so he didn't feel guilty at all when he absorbed them. As Yi Xian absorbed the souls in a steady stream, Yi Xian felt his soul start to undergo a subtle change. Around 2 hours later, Little Soul's voice suddenly resounded. Young Master, it's done. Yi Xian hurriedly stopped, and then he greedily took a deep breath. The feeling of devouring souls was truly too wonderful. He wanted to continue absorbing, but he forcefully stopped himself from doing so. People often died because of their own greed. Yi Xian stood up, and then he swiftly slashed forward with the soul-suppressing sword in his hand. The sword slashed down, and space was instantly torn apart like paper. As if he'd thought of something, Yi Xian leaped up and slashed down with his sword. One strike to fix the soul. This was the sword skill that the woman in the plain dress had taught him. This sword fell without a sound, without any movement at all. Yi Xian was stunned. Little soul said softly, "This sword is so strong." Yi Xian's face darkened. "Little soul, you're mocking me again." Little soul said, "Young master, you're wrong. Don't look at how your sword doesn't move at all. That's because your sword only targets the soul. If there was a person in front of you, then your sword plus my uniqueness can fix that person's soul with one strike. This sword only injures the soul and not the body. This sword skill and I are simply a match made in heaven. Even if it's a creation realm expert, if that expert isn't fully vigilant beforehand, then that expert's soul would be directly fixed by young master's sword." Yi Xian was stunned, and then he said, "It's that formidable?" Little soul said, "Very formidable. The person who created this sword skill is definitely much, much more formidable than young master." Yi Xian hurriedly said, "Stop, stop, stop, stop. Let's not discuss this." Little soul was speechless. A short moment later, Yi Xian started to cultivate. This time, he didn't just cultivate his soul, but his body and soul at the same time. Thus, a strange scene appeared. Yi Xian's soul fused with his body at times, and then separated at other times. At this moment, Yi Xian didn't seem like a single person, but two people. P.S. I ran into something today. A brat was madly ringing the doorbell of each building. When I went downstairs, his mother was next to me. His mother didn't care. I said that her child was ringing the doorbell randomly. She said a few words to the child and continued to play with her phone. After I went back to my room to write, the F***ck rang again. With my bad temper, I went down and pointed at the brat and yelled at him. The brat was so scared that he cried. His mother said to me that he was still a child and asked me why I was so angry. In the past, I'd only seen this kind of thing on the internet, but it was the first time I'd encountered it in person. Chapter 459. Under the moonlight, Yi Xian quietly cultivated alone. After he started cultivating his soul, Yi Xian discovered the true strength of little soul. The destructive power of little soul to the soul was too great. Especially with his soul-setting sword, he was confident that he could kill a manifestation realm cultivator instantly. Of course, he would not underestimate anyone. The more Yi Xian practiced, the more excited he became. He discovered that the separation and combination of the soul and the body had many wonderful uses. For example, when he drew his sword, his soul suddenly left his body. Originally, it was his body that attacked, but he could instantly attack with his soul. Under such circumstances, he could catch his opponent off guard. Of course, there was also a problem. After his soul left his body, he had to be careful that his body would be destroyed. Therefore, he had to be faster. He had to beat his opponent until they could not fight back. Fast. This was his core. Just like that, the days passed. Half a month later, more and more experts came to the Great Wall of Burial Sky. They were all from the never-ending starfield. Besides them, there was another person who came. That was Duge Xian. In the mountains, when she saw Yi Xian, a smile appeared on Duge Xian's face. Yi Xian walked up to Duge Xian and smiled. "Mother." The knot in his heart had long been untied. He only had two family members left in this world. One was his sister, and the other was the woman in front of him. He did not want to hurt anyone because of his willfulness, especially his family. Duge Xian gently stroked Yi Xian's cheek and said softly, "You must have suffered a lot, right?" Yi Xian smiled. "It's nothing." Duge Xian smiled and said softly, Yi Xian said, is fine. She is now cultivating her soul in my sword." Duge Xian nodded. "I understand. Continue your cultivation." Yi Xian nodded and continued his cultivation. Du Guxian sat on a rock and looked at Yi Xian, who was cultivating in the distance. Her face was full of smiles. She seemed to recall something and her smile gradually faded. She said softly, "Yang, do you see? He's very outstanding." As she spoke, she took out a green jade pendant. Looking at the jade pendant in her hand, her gaze became somewhat dazed. After a long time, Du Guxian put away the jade pendant and said softly, "Where are you?" Du Guxian did not notice that the jade pendant in her hands suddenly trembled. Somewhere on the wall of the Great Wall of Heaven Burial, a woman stood quietly, her long skirt fluttering gently in the mountain breeze. She looked very graceful and graceful. Beside the woman was a middle-aged man. This person was Mr. Bai. Mr. Bai said softly, "The people from the other side have also joined in." The woman looked into the distant horizon. "You came for him?" Mr. Bai nodded. The woman said softly, "How is he?" Mr. Bai said, "Your talent is not bad, and your strength has increased a lot." The woman nodded slightly and looked at the end of the horizon. At the end of the horizon was the Moke clan. Mr. Bai suddenly asked, "What about the painter?" The woman said softly, "Without her, we can still do it." Mr. Bai nodded. "No matter what, it's time to end it." The woman suddenly looked down. Not far away, a man was walking toward the Great Wall of Heaven Burial. Mr. Bai said, "The people from the other side. They should be here for him." The woman nodded slightly. Suddenly, she frowned. Mr. Bai looked at the man below, and soon, he also frowned slightly. Below, the man walked to the bottom of the wall, looked up at the Great Wall of Heaven Burial and smiled. "Is Yi Xian here?" The voice was not loud, but it seemed to have a magical power. Almost everyone in the Great Wall of Heaven Burial heard it. Yi Xian also heard it. On the wall, the woman was expressionless. "This person cultivates an ancient secret technique." Mr. Bai nodded. "The people from the other side are serious." Soon, many people appeared on the wall. At this time, a figure suddenly jumped down from the city wall. This person was Zhang Jun. Zhang Jun sized up the man. The man was wearing a loose cloud robe, and on the robe, there were some unknown patterns that he could not identify. The man glanced at the war army and shook his head. "You're not Yi Xian." The war army said calmly, "Are you done? You're just going to fight one person? Come, I'll fight you." As soon as he said that, he was about to make a move. At this moment, a voice suddenly came from the side. "Let me do it." The war army looked over. Not far away, Yi Xian walked over slowly. The war army nodded. "Be careful." With that, he retreated to the side. Yi Xian looked at the man. The man smiled. "I heard that your sword is fast." Yi Xian did not waste any time and lightly stomped his right foot. Chi! His entire body turned into a black line and disappeared on the spot. In the distance, the man narrowed his eyes. The next moment, he opened his palm, and a talisman suddenly flew out. The next moment, a golden talisman shield appeared in front of him. At this moment, Yi Xian's sword had just arrived. Boom! The golden talisman shield shook violently, and Yi Xian retreated rapidly. At this moment, the man formed a strange hand seal. The next moment, he pulled his hands to the side. "Open the heavenly gate." As soon as his voice fell, boom! In front of Yi Xian, the space suddenly cracked. In an instant, countless dark energy swept out from the cracked space. This dark energy was like a black hole, devouring everything as soon as it came out. In the distance, Yi Xian retreated continuously. After retreating hundreds of feet, he found that the space around him suddenly cracked. Then, countless dark energy flooded towards him. Yi Xian stopped and gently stomped his right foot. Between his brows, the space Tao quietly condensed. The next moment, Yi Xian shouted, "Close!" As soon as his voice fell, the cracked space in the surroundings suddenly healed. Seeing this scene, the man frowned slightly. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly appeared in front of him. The man's pupils shrank, and he chose not to fight head-on. He softly said, "Divine movement." As soon as his voice fell, he directly turned into a beam of light and disappeared. Yi Xian frowned because at this moment, he actually couldn't sense the other party. Suddenly, his expression changed slightly. He turned around and slashed with his sword. Before the sword fell, a palm had already pressed against his chest. Bang! Yi Xian retreated rapidly. At this moment, a beam of light flashed in front of him. So fast. Yi Xian knew that he couldn't dodge at this moment. Immediately, his soul left his body. At this moment, a palm pressed against his chest, but his sword slashed down. Chi! An arm directly flew out. 100 feet away, the man suddenly appeared. At this moment, his face was extremely pale. In the distance, Yi Xian's soul returned to his body. As soon as it returned to his body, a trace of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. He looked at the man not far away. The other party's speed was too fast. His sword just now was aimed at the other party's head. Unfortunately, the other party was too fast and he only cut off the other party's arm. Somewhere on the city wall, the woman glanced at Yi Xian and said softly, "The separation of the physical body and soul." Interesting. The separation of the physical body and the soul. Interesting. Mr. Bai said softly, "Indeed." The man glanced at Yi Xian. At this moment, there was a trace of seriousness in his eyes. After a moment of silence, he suddenly clenched his left hand. Qianjun. As soon as his voice fell, he suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian and blasted out a punch. The punch flew out. Boom! The space around Yi Xian instantly collapsed. What terrifying power! Yi Xian was shocked. He didn't dare to be careless. He suddenly drew his sword. Drawing the sword to determine life and death. The sword slashed down. Bang! Yi Xian instantly retreated 100 feet away. However, he hadn't even stopped when the man appeared in front of him again. After that, the man blasted another punch towards his face. As soon as the punch was thrown out, the space around Yi Xian cracked like a spider web. There was no room for retreat. Yi Xian hadn't thought about retreating. Because he would definitely fall into a passive position if he retreated against someone whose speed far surpassed his. So, Yi Xian chose to fight the man head-on. Yi Xian drew his sword and slashed down. However, his soul suddenly left his body when the sword was about to strike the man's fist. The man's pupils constricted when he saw this, and he hurriedly withdrew his fist. Because a sword had arrived between his eyebrows. The sword was longer than the fist. If he hadn't withdrawn his fist, then he would have been able to blast Yi Xian's body apart with a single punch. However, Yi Xian would be able to pierce through the space between his eyebrows. He didn't choose to fight Yi Xian to the death because it wasn't worth it. He didn't focus on cultivating the soul. If Yi Xian's sword pierced through the space between his eyebrows, then it was very likely that he would die. As for Yi Xian, he would at most lose his body. The man withdrew his fist to block. Bang! The man instantly retreated explosively as soon as Yi Xian's sword slashed down. The woman on the city wall suddenly shook her head. That fellow has lost. What a pity that this ancient secret technique is. Mr. Bai looked down. It was difficult because after Yi Xian pushed him back, Yi Xian's soul had suddenly returned to his body. In the next moment, Yi Xian had appeared in front of the man, and he swung his sword again. The man raised his arm to block again. Bam! The man retreated explosively, but at this moment, Yi Xian appeared in front of him again. Yi Xian suddenly drew his sword. At this moment, the man's expression changed, and he was about to block when a ray of sword light silently appeared behind the man. Chi. The ray of sword light instantly pierced through the man's eyebrows. Then your body will stiffen. Yi Xian appeared in front of the man, and the man glared at Yi Xian. Drawing the sword is fake. The flying sword is real. Yi Xian nodded. Correct. As soon as he finished speaking, he swung his sword horizontally. Chi. The man's head directly flew off, and blood spurted out like a fountain. Seeing this scene, a smile appeared on the faces of the people on the city wall. Yi Xian kept the man's storage ring. In the storage ring, he saw a thick ancient book. On the cover of the ancient book, there were 4 large words, Ancient Secret Technique. Yi Xian kept the storage ring, turned around, and walked into the distance. Seeing this scene, the people on the city wall were stunned. The war army quickly appeared in front of Yi Xian. Brother Yi, what are you going to do? Yi Xian grinned. It's them who come to me every time. It's so boring. This time, I want to find them. The war army was stunned, and then gave a thumbs up. You've got guts. Yi Xian smiled, turned around, and left. But soon, he walked back. The war army was puzzled and asked, Brother Yi, you? Yi Xian said seriously, I forgot to heal my injuries first. I'll go after my injuries are healed. The war army was speechless. Chapter 460. Under the strange expression of the war army, Yi Xian left and disappeared not far away. On the city wall, the woman said softly, soul separation and body coordination. Interesting. Then, she looked at the middle-aged man, did you teach him? The middle-aged man shook his head, no. The woman nodded slightly, he must have comprehended it himself. It's beyond my expectations. Then, she frowned slightly and turned to look at the far end. The next moment, she disappeared. Mr. Bai hesitated for a while but chose not to follow in the end. Soon, the woman came to a river. Beside the river, a woman with a small cloth bag was painting on the water. Above the river, there was a white flower. Pure white. This woman was the painter. The painter looked at the woman walking over and smiled, Wei Yang, we meet again. Wei Yang Tian looked at the painter with a cold expression, what are you doing here? The painter smiled, painting. Wei Yang Tian stared at the painter for a long time. In the end, she turned and left. The painter suddenly said, Wei Yang, aren't you going to talk to the Mok clan? Wei Yang Tian sneered, talk. There are 108,000 corpses at the Great Wall of Sky Burial. Among them are your friends. You want me to talk to them? Talk about what? The painter said softly, more will die. Wei Yang Tian turned and looked at the painter, Painter, you should ask the one from the Mok clan and see if he's willing to listen to you. Then, she turned and disappeared. By the river, the painter sighed softly and turned back to continue painting. As she painted, she seemed to be a little annoyed and waved her right hand lightly. Boom! The entire river evaporated instantly. The painter shrugged and turned to leave. Great Wall of Sky Burial. Inside the stone house, Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground. Healing. Yi Xian returned to the war army's stone house and started to heal. In his mind, the scene of his battle with the man replayed. Ancient secret technique. He knew that his opponent was using an ancient secret skill. It had to be said that this ancient secret skill was quite terrifying, especially the opponent's speed. It was so fast that it could only be described as terrifying. It could be said that the other party's speed was almost the same as the speed of his flying sword. If it wasn't for the fact that he had comprehended the soul technique, he definitely wouldn't have been able to do anything to his opponent. Strong. The people he met were getting stronger and stronger. At this time, Soul's voice suddenly sounded, Young Lord, can you let me have a look at that ancient secret technique? Yi Xian said, of course. As he spoke, he handed the ancient secret art to little Soul. After a while, Soul said in a low voice, this isn't an ancient secret art at all. It can only be considered an ordinary secret art. A true ancient secret art can draw upon the chi of heaven and earth and the origin of the galaxy. When used, it can destroy a small world at will. As for the one before us, it can only be considered a secret technique. Yi Xian hurriedly said, "Little soul, do you know the cultivation method of the ancient secret technique?" Soul said, "I don't know." Yi Xian, Soul said again, "The cultivation method of the ancient secret art is very rare and difficult for ordinary people to obtain. Although I have a high status in the netherworld race and can obtain it, I'm just a sword. What do I need the ancient secret art for? Therefore, I don't have it either, hee hee." Yi Xian's face was full of black lines. What did this hee hee mean? Soul said, "Young lord, you can cultivate this secret art. Once you successfully cultivate it, it will be of great help to you. For example, the speed of your flying sword can increase by more than several times in an instant." Yi Xian asked in a low voice, "Will there be any backlash? This chapter is not finished, please turn the page." Soul said, "Of course there will be. This kind of low-level secret art has a great backlash. If you use it, your body will be extremely weak, and at that time, you will be like an ordinary person." Yi Xian was silent. As expected, this kind of thing still had side effects. Because the man's strength increase was really a bit terrifying, and this kind of terrifying improvement was not normal at all. Soul said again, "This kind of secret art is generally used to save one's life, and that man just now, because of his special physique, when he uses the secret art, the backlash will be reduced. If young lord successfully cultivates it, remember not to use it casually." Yi Xian said in a low voice, "Is my physique very ordinary?" Soul said, "Not very ordinary, it's very, very ordinary." Yi Xian's face suddenly darkened. He now found that this soul really didn't know how to chat. As if thinking of something, Yi Xian suddenly frowned. Because he still remembered that when he first met the woman in the plain dress, she said he had some kind of natural Dao body. Although he didn't know what kind of physique it was, it sounded like it should be a special physique. Why did Soul say his physique was ordinary? Moreover, along the way, no one had said that his physique was good. Could it be that the woman in the plain dress had hidden her physique? Thinking of this, Yi Xian increasingly felt that this was the case. Not chatting with this soul who didn't know how to chat, he began to continue to heal. As for the secret art, he decided to put it aside for now because he didn't want to bite off more than he could chew. Now, he just wanted to cultivate his soul. About an hour later, Yi Xian's injuries were almost recovered. Then, he directly went out of the stone house, left the great wall of burial sky, and went straight to the Moke clan. Every time, it was someone else who came to find him, which made him very unhappy. Moreover, he was now extremely eager to fight. Only fighting could let him find his own shortcomings, and only in this way could he better improve himself. At this moment, a figure suddenly appeared in front of him. It was the war army. The war army looked at Yi Xian. "You want to go to the Moke clan?" Yi Xian nodded. The war army asked, "Do you know where the Moke clan is?" Yi Xian shook his head. The war army smiled and said, "I'll take you there." Yi Xian looked at the war army. "I want to go to the Moke clan." The war army said, "If you don't go to the Moke clan, then I won't go with you. Let's go. If we go one-on-one, the Moke clan won't gang up on us." Yi Xian thought about it and then said, "Let's go." Hearing this, the war army grinned. "Let's go. Have you forgotten me?" At this moment, a voice suddenly came from behind the two of them. The two of them heard the voice and looked. The person who came was Baldy. Baldy walked in front of the two of them and said with a smile, "Have you forgotten me?" Yi Xian smiled and said, "How could that be? Let's go. Let's go to the Moke clan and let me see the genius of the Moke clan." After that, the three of them quickly disappeared not far away. Just after the three of them disappeared, Ague and Mr. Bai suddenly appeared on the scene. Ague said, "Not going to stop them?" Mr. Bai said softly, "Why should we stop them? The Moke clan and the foreign land dared to come to our place. Why can't our people go to their place?" Ague said in a deep voice, "That kid has a temper." Mr. Bai nodded. "He's not bad. At least he's not bad. If we met him earlier and trained him, his strength might not be weaker than Bai Yi." Ague wanted to say something but stopped. Mr. Bai asked with a smile, "What do you want to say?" Ague said softly, "This kid is usually very slippery. He's not like a swordsman. But if he goes all out, he's still very powerful." This chapter is not finished. Please continue to the next page, Mr. Bai said with a smile. "What are you trying to say?" Ague said in a deep voice, "Sir, as far as I know, many forces in the never-ending starfield are eyeing his treasure. They want him to use it to fight against the Moke clan." Mr. Bai nodded. "Yes." Ague looked at Mr. Bai. Mr. Bai said softly, "They want the Palace Lord to step in." Ague asked, "What does the Palace Lord think?" Mr. Bai said softly, "The Palace Lord hasn't made a decision yet." Ague's face darkened. "If the Palace Lord takes the treasure, it means that he will definitely die, right?" Mr. Bai nodded. Ague was about to say something when Mr. Bai said softly, "Don't worry. Think about it. With the Palace Lord's pride, why would she snatch that kid's treasure? Besides, the Palace Lord knows very well that if it did not follow that kid willingly, how could that kid subdue it? Besides, this treasure carries karma. If an outsider gets his hands on it, it might be a disaster." Then, he looked at Ague. "Although the Palace Lord has no intention of snatching that treasure, I'm afraid that some people will act first and report later," Ague said in a deep voice. "How dare they?" Mr. Bai said softly, "To them, if the kid is killed, the Palace Lord will not take revenge on them for a dead person. A dead genius is not a genius. He is worthless. Do you understand?" Ague was silent. Mr. Bai said, "Follow him secretly during this period. Don't let anyone do anything stupid." Ague nodded and left quietly. Mr. Bai was silent for a moment. Then, he turned to look at a place not far away. A middle-aged man in a black robe was walking slowly toward him. The black-robed middle-aged man smiled. "Old Bai, long time no see." Then, he waved his right hand and a table appeared in front of them. On the table, there was a pot of wine and 2 wine glasses. Mr. Bai said calmly, "I heard you went to the foreign territory." The middle-aged man nodded. "I went to the foreign territory. I have to say, some of the old guys in the foreign territory are very powerful." Then, he picked up the wine glass on the table and pointed it at Mr. Bai. Mr. Bai also picked up his glass. The two looked at each other and drank it in one gulp. The middle-aged man laughed and said, "I haven't fought with you for a long time. How about we exchange a few blows today?" Mr. Bai said calmly, "There's no hurry. There will be a chance very soon. Isn't that right?" The middle-aged man smiled. "That's true. We will have a good fight very soon." Then, he turned to look not far away. "Is that kid your disciple?" Mr. Bai shook his head. The middle-aged man said, "He beats Waching up like that. That's impressive." Mr. Bai said, "Mo Shao, your Moke clan has secretly trained many geniuses. First, Tian Sha and Di Sha, then Zhuaqing, and Mo Xia." Mo Shao smiled. "You've met him?" Mr. Bai nodded. Mo Shao smiled. "Not bad, right? Let me tell you, he is the most outstanding person in our Moke clan apart from the clan leader. No, even that clan leader might not be better than him." Then, he looked at Mr. Bai. "Actually, if your disciple was still alive, she would have been able to compete with Mo Xia." Unfortunately, Mr. Bai's face darkened. Then Mo Shao laughed. All right. Let's not talk about her. I'll treat you to a drink another day. Then, he turned around and left. Mr. Bai didn't say anything for a long time. He didn't leave. P.S. Have you guys realized something strange? When you dream, other than erotic dreams, you'll forget all other dreams the next day. End of this chapter. Chapter 461. After Yi Xian and the other two crossed the vast plains, they soon saw a huge canyon. At the entrance of the canyon, there were two tall mountains that looked like two gates. Between the two mountains, they could vaguely see a magnificent hall. Yi Xian looked at the hall and whispered, "Moke clan?" The war army nodded. However, this should not be their lair. As for where their lair is, only the palace lord knows. Baldy whispered, "Although they are enemies, I have to say that this clan is really admirable. Since I came here, I have never seen anyone in their clan afraid of death." Yi Xian smiled. "Let's go." Soon, the three of them came to the canyon. Along the way, Yi Xian found that several divine senses swept over the three of them, but no one came out to stop them. Under the canyon, Yi Xian looked into the distance and smiled slightly, seeking death. His voice was like thunder, shaking the world. Seeking death. Next to Yi Xian, the war army's mouth twitched slightly. "Brother Yi, aren't you being too arrogant?" Yi Xian said seriously, "You have to shout out your aura first, understand?" Aura. The war army thought about it and said, "It seems so." On the top of the mountain, a man suddenly appeared, and beside him, there was a black Qilin. The evil Qilin glanced at Yi Xian and the other two below, and its eyes were full of hostility. It was about to rush down. At this moment, the man gently stroked its head, and it immediately lay down. The man smiled slightly, then looked at Yi Xian below, and whispered, "Swordsman?" At this moment, Zhua Qing, Sky Fiend, and Earth Fiend also came behind the man. In addition, there was a woman with short red hair, and her eyes were like knives, extremely cold. Zhua Qing whispered, "Shall I go meet him?" The man shook his head. He turned his head and looked at the mountain peak in front of him. There were three people standing there, 2 women and 1 man. The one in the lead was a man dressed in a black robe, and there was a strange aura floating around him. Behind the man, the red-haired woman said coldly, "I don't like these guys from the other side." Tian Sha said, "I don't like it either." Zhua Qing shook her head and smiled, not saying a word. The man whispered, "Then leave the swordsman to them." A red-haired woman snorted coldly, "That swordsman has a treasure on him, why would he give it to them?" The man glanced at the red-haired woman and said with a smile, "Feng, which do you think is more important, a supreme treasure or the entire clan?" The woman called Feng spoke in a low voice, "Our Moke clan doesn't need to rely on outsiders." The man said softly, "I need it." Everyone looked at the man, who said softly, "The world only knows that the never-ending star domain's never-ending heavenly palace lord is invincible. In fact, there is another person in the never-ending star domain who is also very powerful." Ah Feng asked, "Who?" The man said softly, "Painter." If our clan wants to completely occupy the never-ending star domain, we must defeat 2 people. One of them is the never-ending heavenly palace lord, and the other is this person. Ah Feng was expressionless. They were just born earlier than us. If we were in the same generation, why would we be afraid of them? The man smiled and said, "What you said is not unreasonable." At that moment, Zhua Qing suddenly said, "They've attacked." Everyone looked down. Below, a man had already appeared in front of Yi Xian and the other two. However, it was not the black-robed man who led the group, but another man holding a spear. The man with the spear walked in front of Yi Xian and the other two. War Army and Baldy retreated to the side. The man suddenly struck with his spear. The spear was as fast as lightning, pointing straight at the space between Yi Xian's eyebrows. And when his spear was a few inches away from Yi Xian's eyebrows, Yi Xian suddenly turned sideways and then moved forward. He took a quick step forward, and at the same time, he drew his sword and slashed. Buzz! The sound of the sword resounded, shaking heaven and earth. As the sword slashed down, the man with the spear lightly tapped the ground with his toes, and his entire body floated backward. Yi Xian's sword missed, and at that moment, the man with the spear suddenly leaped up and smashed down with his spear. He was extremely fast, and he instantly arrived above Yi Xian's head. Yi Xian dodged sideways, and the man's spear hit nothing, but soon, he swung his right hand, and the spear swung toward Yi Xian's position. Yi Xian raised his sword to block. Bang! With a swing of the spear, Yi Xian retreated repeatedly, and the man was about to take advantage of the situation to pursue. However, at that moment, his expression changed drastically, and he instinctively raised his spear to block. Boom! There was an explosion, and the man instantly retreated. Before he could stop, Yi Xian appeared in front of him, and then, Yi Xian slashed down with his sword. The man's pupils constricted slightly, and he stabbed the spear in his right hand into the ground. Bang! The ground trembled, and in the next moment, a powerful spear aura shot up from the ground and enveloped Yi Xian. At the same time, he stomped his right foot back, and his spear stabbed forward. Hiss! Everywhere the tip of the spear passed, space was directly torn apart. This time, Yi Xian didn't choose to dodge the spear, and he slashed down with his sword when the spear arrived in front of him. It was a tit for tat. The tip of the spear and the blade collided, bang! An explosion resounded, and at the same time, the two of them retreated repeatedly. However, in the next moment, they charged at each other again. On the peak of the mountain, the man beside Zhuo Qing said softly, "He's training." Zhuo Qing nodded, "What do you think of him?" The man smiled, "I haven't seen his true strength, so I won't give an evaluation." As he spoke, he looked at Zhuo Qing, "You fought him, how do you feel?" Zhuo Qing fell silent for a moment, and then she said, "His sword is very fast." The man smiled, "Nothing else?" Zhuo Qing smiled lightly, "That's enough." The man nodded slightly, "That's true." As he spoke, he looked down at Yi Xian and said softly, "Actually, I'd like to meet that woman who was said to be invincible in the same realm of cultivation all those years ago." Tian Sha's expression instantly changed when he heard this. The man said, "Tian Sha, Zhuo Qing, Feng, and I were all cultivating in the outside world all those years ago, and only you've come into contact with her. What sort of person is she?" Tian Sha fell silent for a moment, and then he said, "She's a person that instills fear in others." The man chuckled, "That's quite a pity." Tian Sha shook his head and didn't say anything. In next to no time, numerous explosions resounded from below, and the battle between Yi Xian and the spear-wielding man was already in full swing. Moreover, based on the situation of the battle, both of them seemed to be on par. Bang! Meanwhile, Yi Xian and the spear-wielding man suddenly split apart. After the spear-wielding man stopped, he looked at Yi Xian who stood nearby, and his expression was extremely cold. "You're using me as a sparring partner." Yi Xian said, "You don't mind, right?" The spear-wielding man stared fixedly at Yi Xian, "I mind very much." As soon as he finished speaking, the spear in his hands suddenly started trembling violently, and it seemed like he was about to release some sort of ultimate attack. However, right at this moment, a strand of imperceptible sword light flashed. The spear-wielding man's expression instantly changed drastically when he witnessed this scene, and he hurriedly stopped and raised his spear to block in front of him. Bang! The spear-wielding man retreated explosively over 100 m back, and he hadn't even stopped when Yi Xian had appeared in front of him. Yi Xian suddenly drew his sword, causing the spear-wielding man's expression to change drastically, and he was about to counterattack. However, a strand of sword light suddenly pierced through the center of his forehead. Hiss! The spear-wielding man's body stiffened, and only now did he notice that Yi Xian hadn't drawn his sword at all. At this moment, he finally understood that drawing his sword was an illusion, and the flying sword was the real deal. Yi Xian pulled out the storage ring on the spear-wielding man's finger, and then he looked up. Anyone else? On the mountain peak, the man beside Zhua Qing smiled and said, "Interesting." Zhua Qing said solemnly, "His sword is even faster than before." Behind them, the woman named Ah Feng suddenly said, "I'll go." As she spoke, she was about to go down, but she was stopped by the spear-wielding man. Ah Feng looked at the spear-wielding man. "Mo, I won't allow someone from the never-ending starfield to be so arrogant in front of us." Mo said softly, "Stand down." The woman named Ah Feng snorted coldly, turned around, and left. Zhua Qing shook her head and smiled. What a temper. Mo looked into the distance. On the mountain peak, the black-robed man and the woman behind him hadn't moved. Mo smiled and said, "Brother Nanli, if you don't make a move, the Moke clan will make a move, and everything he has will belong to the Moke clan." The black-robed man looked at Mo and didn't say anything. A moment later, he suddenly vanished, and when he appeared again, he was already in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian's heart shook when he saw the black-robed man, and he secretly raised his guard. The black-robed man said softly, "Let me see how fast your sword can be." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly vanished. Hiss! A tearing sound resounded in the surroundings. His body tore through space. The space in front of Yi Xian collapsed inch by inch, and it was extremely shocking. An expert. The moment an expert made a move, it was obvious. Yi Xian didn't dare underestimate the black-robed man at all. He stomped his right foot, and his entire body transformed into a ray of sword light that shot out explosively. Boom! A deafening explosion resounded in the surroundings. A silhouette was sent flying out. It was none other than Yi Xian. Yi Xian instantly moved 300 m back, but he hadn't even stopped when the black-robed man appeared in front of him once more. Yi Xian stabbed with his sword. The black-robed man didn't dodge at all and just allowed Yi Xian's sword to strike his head. Bang! The sword shook violently, but the black-robed man was completely unharmed. Moreover, the black-robed man's fist smashed against Yi Xian's stomach. Bang! Yi Xian's figure was instantly blasted flying. The black-robed man clenched his right fist tightly and smashed it down towards Yi Xian from afar. Spatial break. He struck with his fist. The space around Yi Xian instantly collapsed. Bang! Yi Xian was blasted 300 m away. He just descended to the ground when the black-robed man suddenly leaped 300 m into the air. In an instant, the space in an area of 30 kilometers started to tremble violently. The black-robed man slowly closed his eyes. After a moment of silence, he suddenly slapped his palm down. Bang! The heavens and the earth shook violently, and the space in an area of 30 kilometers instantly cracked into the shape of a spider web. At the same time, a powerful force descended from the sky and headed straight for Yi Xian. The force was so strong that it could destroy the heavens and the earth. Yi Xian took a deep breath. He held his sword with both hands, and in the next moment, he drew his sword and slashed upwards. At the instant he drew his sword and slashed upwards, his soul suddenly left his body, and his soul slashed out as well. It was a very strange scene. Because at this moment, both Yi Xian's body and soul were attacking with their swords. Seeing this scene, Mo and the others instantly furrowed their brows. Chapter 462. Yi Xian's body and soul attacked at practically the exact same time, and it seemed like a single attack. He slashed down. A powerful sword aura instantly stopped the powerful force in midair. After a moment of silence. Bang! The force instantly shattered. A ray of light shot into the sky and shot towards the black-robed man. The black-robed man clenched his right hand into a fist and punched down. Bang! The heavens and the earth trembled as the black-robed man retreated by over 100 m. Meanwhile, his eyes suddenly narrowed slightly, and he swiftly raised his arms to block the attack. A ray of light had suddenly arrived before him. Bang! The black-robed man's arms trembled, and he retreated repeatedly. However, he'd only just retreated when another ray of light slashed towards him. It was extremely fast. The black-robed man smashed his fist forward. Bang! The powerful fist aura instantly shattered the ray of light, but another ray of light arrived. It was practically a seamless connection. The black-robed man didn't even have the time to launch a second punch, and the sword slashed against his chest. Bang! The black-robed man instantly retreated 300 m away. As soon as he stopped, he suddenly raised his hands towards the sky. Defend! As soon as he finished speaking, a huge barrier of light suddenly appeared around him. Meanwhile, strands of light arrived soundlessly. Bang! 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 Countless rays of light slashed down incessantly like a storm, and it was an extremely magnificent scene. Sua Qing's face was gloomy. Mo Xia remained silent as well. A short while later, Sua Qing spoke softly, "The speed and might of that sword. If it's a group battle, then it's extremely terrifying when he attacks from the shadows." Mo Xia nodded slightly. Presently, Yi Xian was fighting the black-robed man in a one-on-one battle. So, Yi Xian's flying sword wasn't especially terrifying because it was a sword of light. But if it was a group battle, then Yi Xian could attack from the shadows, and very few could defeat him. Even Sua Qing was extremely fearful. He wasn't afraid if he fought Yi Xian in an open battle, but he was extremely fearful if Yi Xian played tricks from the shadows. Meanwhile, Mo Xia spoke softly, "Are you confident in your ability to deal with him?" Sua Qing said solemnly, "I can only deal with him." Mo Xia faintly nodded, "That's enough." Sua Qing looked at Mo Xia. "The people from the other side can't deal with him?" Mo Xia said softly, "Let's see if they are willing to part with their hard-earned capital." Below, Yi Xian suddenly rushed in front of the man, and those flying swords still did not break. When Yi Xian arrived in front of the black-robed man, he slashed down with his sword. Boom! The light around the black-robed man instantly shattered. Meanwhile, the black-robed man blasted his fist towards Yi Xian. Yi Xian didn't dodge, he just stabbed out with his sword. Boom! The two of them rapidly retreated, but as Yi Xian was retreating, countless flying swords suddenly slashed at the black-robed man's body. Boom 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 boom. The black-robed man retreated madly, and he retreated thousands of feet away. After he stopped, the black robe exploded into pieces. Underneath the black robe was a pure black armor. It was a treasure at the blessed realm. In the distance, Yi Xian took a deep breath, playing with equipment. All along, he didn't want to use soul-suppressing sword easily. It wasn't arrogance, but he hoped that he wouldn't rely too much on these external objects because soul-suppressing sword was too powerful. This chapter is not over, please turn the page, strength that didn't belong to him. Of course, if others also used external objects, he definitely wouldn't be stupid enough not to use them. In the distance, the black-robed man stared at Yi Xian. "I underestimated your sword." Yi Xian wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and grinned, "Come, let's continue." As his voice fell, he directly rushed towards the black-robed man not far away with his sword. Fight! Right now, he only had this thought in his mind, to fight to his heart's content. Because he found that he kind of liked this kind of battle. Seeing Yi Xian rush over with his sword, the black-robed man's expression instantly turned sinister. He was just about to make a move, but at this moment, a sword suddenly appeared in front of him. The black-robed man's pupils constricted slightly, and he raised his hand and blasted out a punch. His punch was like a river bursting its banks, and a powerful force instantly shattered the sword light. At this moment, another sword light appeared in front of him, and he didn't have time to punch a second time. So, he crossed his arms and suddenly blocked it in front of him. Bang! Yi Xian's sword slashed on the black-robed man's arms, and the latter instantly retreated explosively. Meanwhile, another sword light slashed over. It was extremely swift, and the black-robed man didn't have time to react before the sword light slashed on his body. Bang! The sword light shattered, and the black-robed man retreated explosively once more. This time, he retreated explosively for 300 m, and he hadn't even stopped when Yi Xian appeared in front of him once more. The black-robed man suddenly pressed his hands together and shouted angrily, "Defend!" As soon as he finished speaking, the space in front of him suddenly condensed and formed a thick spatial barrier. Yi Xian's sword slashed directly on this spatial barrier, and the entire spatial barrier suddenly trembled. Yi Xian's arm felt numb, and when he wanted to attack again, the black-robed man had already retreated 600 m away. More than 1 kilometer away, his flying sword's speed couldn't reach its limit. Yi Xian stopped. In the distance, the black-robed man wiped the blood from the corners of his mouth, and he stared fixedly at Yi Xian while clenching his right hand tightly. Yi Xian smiled and said, "You're not fighting anymore?" The black-robed man said coldly, "You seem to be very complacent." Yi Xian shook his head and smiled, "I don't want to fight a war of words with you. Just tell me, will you fight or not?" The black-robed man clenched his right hand tightly, and in the next moment, he suddenly punched the ground. Bang! The ground instantly collapsed. A powerful force swept towards Yi Xian. In the distance, Yi Xian slashed down with his sword. Hiss! A wisp of sword light instantly shattered the force, but at this moment, the black-robed man retreated another 300 m. Seeing this, Yi Xian, who was about to make a move, shook his head, boring. After saying that, he turned around and left. If the other party kept dodging, he really couldn't do anything to the other party. Seeing Yi Xian turn around and leave, the black-robed man suddenly shouted angrily, "Yi Xian!" Yi Xian ignored the other party and sped up. In a short while, he and the war army disappeared into the distance. Seeing this scene, the black-robed man's face suddenly became extremely ugly. On the mountain peak, Mo Xia shook his head slightly, "He's afraid of death." Zhua Qing looked at the black-robed man below him. Mo Xia nodded, "His strength isn't weaker than that Yi Xian. Unfortunately, he's afraid and doesn't dare to fight to the death. That's why he's at a disadvantage and is being suppressed by Yi Xian." Zhua Qing said in a deep voice, "If he fights Yi Xian in close combat, how can he resist his flying sword?" Mo Xia smiled and said, "There are 2 ways. First, be faster than him. Second, have an invincible body and directly resist his flying sword." Saying that, he looked at Zhua Qing. "You're different. Your physique is special. If you fight him, you can fight normally." Zhua Qing nodded slightly, "Understood." Mo Xia said, "Let's go." Tian Sha suddenly said, "Don't we care about the Yi Xian? This chapter is not finished, please continue." Mo Xia smiled and said, "If we fight now, won't people say that we're taking turns to fight? Don't worry, there will be opportunities in the future." After saying that, he turned around and left. On the other side, after Yi Xian and the war army left, they directly returned to Burial Sky Great Wall. After returning to Burial Sky Great Wall, Yi Xian discovered that there were more people along the way. These people should be from Neverending Star Sector. Of course, this was not the main point. The main point was that when these people looked at him, their gazes were quite abnormal. Yi Xian ignored these people and came to the mountain range where he often cultivated. In an open space, Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground and began to heal his injuries. In the battle with the black-robed man, it had to be said that it was a little thrilling at the beginning. At the beginning, he was suppressed by the other party and almost couldn't fight back. Unfortunately, the other party was afraid of his flying sword in the end and didn't dare to fight him with his life. It was also because of this that he turned the tables at the end and suppressed the other party. In this battle, most of the time, it depended on who was more ruthless and who was more reckless. 2 hours later, Yi Xian's body was almost recovered. He took out the mystic technique. In the mystic technique, there were 4 mystic techniques: divine movement, 1,000 caddies, essence return, and lightning punishment. The 4 mystic techniques represented 4 attributes: speed, strength, defense, and lightning arts. He had already experienced the man's divine movement and 1,000 caddies. As for essence return and lightning punishment, he killed the other party before he could use them. Yi Xian decided to cultivate divine movement first. He needed speed. His flying sword was all about speed, and the faster, the better. Before cultivating, Yi Xian asked, "Little soul, what do I need to pay attention to when cultivating this mystic technique?" Little soul was silent for a moment, then said, "Be careful." Yi Xian. A moment later, Yi Xian began to cultivate. When he began to cultivate this mystic technique, Yi Xian found that it was more powerful than he had expected. For example, if he succeeded in cultivating divine movement, his speed could increase by at least several times in a short period of time. What did several times mean? Especially his flying sword, if its speed increased by several times, it would be so fast that he wouldn't even be able to sense it. At the thought of that scene, Yi Xian felt his blood boil. Cultivate. Yi Xian began to cultivate like crazy. However, because it was his first time cultivating a mystic technique, he was very careful and didn't dare to act recklessly. Moreover, he realized that just as Little Soul had said, this mystic technique did have some side effects. Once he used it, his entire body would feel as if it had been sucked dry, and he would fall into fatigue. It could be said that this mystic technique couldn't be used under normal circumstances. It was either used to fight for his life or to escape. No matter what, it was a way to save his life. At the Great Wall of Heavens, Wei Yang Tian stood silently on the city wall. Behind her was the pavilion master of the 100 Dawn Pavilion, Bai Shaoxian, Mr. Bai, the Ghoul Sect Master Li Changfeng, the Hallowed Grounds Holy Lord Mu Shiran, the White Robes Sect Master Shui Jing, and an old man. It could be said that all the top experts of the never-ending Starfield were here. The Hallowed Grounds Holy Lord Mu Shiran glanced at Wei Yang Tian and said, "Palace Master, everyone knows that the Otherworld has never been enemies with the never-ending Starfield. But now, because of Yi Xian, the Otherworld has joined forces with the Moke clan." Everyone looked at Wei Yang Tian. Wei Yang Tian remained expressionless. "What do you think?" Mu Shiran spoke indifferently, "Palace Master, you can either obtain that precious treasure yourself and use it against the Moke clan, or hand over Yi Xian to appease the Otherworld's rage." The surroundings suddenly fell silent when they heard this. P.S. Happy May Day. I strongly suggest that you don't travel far today, or you'll collapse from the boredom. Finally, today is the 1st, so everyone has a guaranteed monthly ticket. Please support me. End of this chapter. Chapter 463. Everyone was looking at Wei Yang Tian. Mu Yuran, the Holy Land's Holy Lord, looked calm. No one knew what he was thinking. Everyone's expressions were solemn. A moment later, Wei Yang Tian turned to Mu Yuran. Appease the foreign region's anger? Who cares about the foreign region? Why should the never-ending Starfield appease them? Mu Yuran didn't back down. He met Wei Yang Tian's gaze. Palace Lord Wei Yang, this isn't just about the never-ending Star Palace. It concerns the life and death of everyone in the never-ending Starfield. Why should we provoke the foreign region for Yi Xian? Of course, if you want to use that treasure against the Moke clan, the Holy Land will have no objections. Wei Yang Tian stared at Mu Yuran. Suddenly, 2 black figures appeared behind Mu Yuran. Everyone's expressions changed when they saw this. Mu Yuran's expression changed as well. He hadn't expected Wei Yang Tian to attack him. Bai Shaoxian suddenly laughed. Palace Lord, we're all from the never-ending Starfield. We're all doing this for the never-ending Starfield. Wei Yang Tian waved his right hand lightly, and the 2 black figures behind Mu Yuran disappeared. Wei Yang Tian glanced at Mu Yuran coldly, then turned to look at the horizon. I know you're all wondering why I'm protecting him. It's easy to kill him and steal his treasure, but what about after? Such a treasure shouldn't have appeared in the never-ending starfield, but it did, and in the hands of such a weak person. Have you ever wondered why? Everyone fell silent. Wei Yang Tian continued, taking this treasure means accepting the karma that comes with it. Li Changfeng suddenly said, Palace Lord, I have no objections if you don't want to take the treasure by force. However, if it falls into the hands of the foreign region or the Mok clan. The old farmer beside Li Changfeng nodded slightly. Sect Master Li is right. If such a treasure falls into the hands of the Mok clan, it'll be a disaster for the never-ending starfield. Wei Yang Tian turned to look at the crowd. Do you wish for me to control that supreme treasure? Li Changfeng nodded. That's the safest way. Wei Yang Tendo said, the treasure should have already recognized him as its master. Li Zhangfeng was silent. Mu leisurely said, so what? Treasures of heaven and earth belong to those who are capable. Wei Yang Tian glanced at Mu Yuran, then at Bai Shaoxian. Investigate and see if he has come into contact with the Mok clan or the Outlanders. Hearing this, Mu Yuran's face changed. Palace Master Wei Yang, what do you mean? Unending Sky remained silent. Bai Shaoxian tilted her head and whispered something. In the dark, someone retreated. Mu Yuran stared at Wei Yang Tian. Palace Master, what do you mean by this? Could it be that Palace Master is trying to frame my holy land for an unknown ant? Unending Sky remained silent. Mu Yuran's face turned ugly. He looked at the people around him, but they didn't say anything. They hoped that Wei Yang Tian would obtain that precious treasure and use it to deal with the Mok clan. However, Mu Yuran was obviously different. He was too impatient. Moreover, he had the intention to deliberately intensify the conflict and sow discord. Mu Yuran's expression instantly became slightly unsightly when he saw everyone remain silent, but he didn't dare move. If he moved now, he would definitely die. Never ever doubt this woman's strength. About 15 minutes later, a black figure suddenly appeared behind Bai Shaoxian. Bai Shaoxian's brows slowly furrowed. She looked at Unending Sky. Someone came into contact with him. However, I don't know if it's the Mok clan or the other. Someone from the domain. Unending Sky looked at Mu Yuran. The latter said in a low voice, it's the other domain. Hearing this, everyone looked at Mu Yuran. Mu Yuran was expressionless. They came into contact with me and said that they don't want to be enemies with the never-ending starfield. As long as we hand over Yi Xian, they will leave immediately. They can even help us fight against the Mok clan. As he spoke, he glanced at the crowd. Everyone, I feel that we really don't need to make the entire other domain our enemy for the sake of one Yi Xian. At this moment, Unending Sky suddenly said softly, all this time, I've felt that the never-ending starfield is inferior to the Mok clan in terms of unity. They are a clan, but we are a group. As she spoke, she looked at Mu Yuran. The latter's expression changed. At this moment, he already knew that Unending Sky had the intention to kill him. At this moment, he was secretly on guard, ready to fight to the death at any moment. At this moment, Taoist Qing Nong suddenly said, Palace Lord, the first Holy Lord died in battle. Countless sacred land geniuses have also sacrificed their lives for the never-ending starfield. Hearing this, Unending Sky was silent for a moment. Then, she turned and said, Mu Shiran, you are their disgrace. From this moment on, you are not allowed to take even half a step out of the sacred land. Let someone else be the master of the sacred land. Mu Shiran still wanted to say something, but Taoist Qing Nong suddenly said, go back. Mu Shiran glanced at Unending Sky and the others, then turned and left. Beside Unending Sky, Bai Shaoxian suddenly said, I'm afraid this person already has the intention to rebel. Beside her, Taoist Qing Nong said, everyone has their own ambitions. Bai Shaoxian shook her head. It's not just about him. Taoist Qing Nong smiled bitterly. Miss Xian, the sacred land also has countless seniors who died in battle for the never-ending starfield. It's best not to be too ruthless. Bai Shaoxian smiled and said, I respect those who sacrifice themselves in the sacred land, but it's precisely because of this that we should protect this starfield well. Mu Yuran is too selfish, especially at this critical juncture. He's still calculating his own little schemes. He really deserves to be killed. Daoist Qing Nong looked at Wei Yang Tian, who was nearby. Wei Yang Tian said softly, Us. We've been at ease for a little too long. We've almost forgotten about the Mok clan. With that, she turned and left. On the spot, Bai Shaoxian looked at Taoist Qing Nong. It's not that we're targeting the Holy Lord of the Sacred Land. It's just that he will definitely cause trouble, and it's extremely likely that he will cause trouble at a critical juncture for us. With that, she turned and left. Taoist Qing Nong smiled bitterly and looked at Li Zhangfeng. Actually, the old man has a little doubt as well. Why does the palace lord keep protecting that youth? Li Zhangfeng said, this person isn't simple. Besides, I feel that if we listen to Mu Yuran's words and kill this person to seize his treasure, I'm afraid we'll really attract trouble. As he spoke, he looked at Taoist Qing Nong. As Miss Xian said, I'm afraid the Holy Lord will not be willing to be trapped in the sacred land. Taoist Qing Nong shook his head. If he's willing to be trapped, he might be able to live. If he's unwilling, there's nothing the old man can do. Li Zhangfeng nodded. Let's go. With that, the two turned and left. In the mountain range, Yi Xian was still quietly cultivating the mystic technique. Currently, he could already cast the stride technique with some difficulty. It had to be said that with the enhancement of the mystic technique, his speed had increased to a terrifying degree. He was so fast that he could not control it. It was too fast. After using the mystic technique on the flying sword's speed increased by at least several times. However, the Qi sword could not withstand this speed at all. Only the soul-suppressing sword could. Besides that, there was another serious problem. If he used it on the flying sword, he could only use the flying sword once at most because it consumed too much energy. Not only did it consume a lot of his soul, but it also consumed a lot of his physical body. Because it was too fast, he had to wear the god set. Otherwise, his physical body would be torn to pieces by this speed. This was the first time he felt that being fast was not a good thing. After mastering the Swift, he decided to start cultivating 15 kilograms. 15 kilograms. He still remembered the scene of the man sending him flying with a punch. It was so strong that it was unreasonable. If he used it on the drawing the sword to fight the heavens, it would undoubtedly be very terrifying. As if thinking of something, Yi Xian suddenly asked, Little soul, how can I avoid the backlash of these mystic techniques? Is there such a way? He suddenly remembered that if he did not suffer from the backlash, these mystic techniques would be a little terrifying. Little soul was silent for a moment and then said, yes. Yi Xian hurriedly asked, hurry up and say it. Little soul said, young master's physical body is strong enough to resist the backlash of these mystic techniques. This is the only way. Or, young master has a special physique and is born with a strong resistance. Yi Xian said in a low voice, looks like the only way is to strengthen the physical body. Little soul suddenly said, if young master wants to strengthen the physical body, I have a way. Yi Xian hurriedly asked, what way? Little soul said, absorb souls and use them to strengthen the physical body and form a unique soul shield. Yi Xian was stunned, and then he said, is that possible? Little soul said, yes, young master can absorb souls and use their energy to temper the body. The effect is very good. Yi Xian thought for a moment and then said, okay, I'll try. With that, he took out the soul-suppressing sword and started to absorb. In next to no time, countless strands of soul energy started to converge towards him, and then they were quickly absorbed by his body. At this time, Little Soul said, young master needs to maintain a clear state of mind and not be affected by the consciousness of the soul. Yi Xian nodded. He was a swordsman, so he could do this. Just like that, time passed bit by bit. Night fell. Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground. At this moment, his body was like a black vortex. Countless strands of soul energy were still constantly converging towards his body, and at this moment, his body was gradually changing. 2 hours later, Yi Xian suddenly stood up. He gently pressed his hands to both sides, and in an instant, the space on both sides shook violently. Yi Xian took a deep breath. At this moment, he felt his body was full of strength. As if thinking of something, Yi Xian hurriedly asked, Little Soul, I absorbed so many souls, did it affect you? Little Soul said, no. Yi Xian was puzzled, why? Little Soul was silent for a moment, and then said, because I absorbed them without wanting them. The corner of Yi Xian's mouth twitched. Damn, he kind of wanted to hit someone. At this moment, suddenly, the space around Yi Xian suddenly condensed into a huge cage that locked Yi Xian. A moment later, a light formation appeared in front of Yi Xian, and in an instant, Yi Xian disappeared. At this moment, a voice suddenly resounded from the great wall of heaven. Impudent. It was Endless Sky's voice. Chapter 464. A beam of white light suddenly shot up from the great wall of burial sky. The next moment, the beam of white light tore through space and entered the spatial black hole. As never-ending sky disappeared, Mr. Bai and a Gui showed up where Yi Xian had been. Mr. Bai's face darkened when he saw Yi Xian disappear. The other world? A Gui asked. Mr. Bai nodded. Let's go. He pulled with both hands, and the space in front of him tore apart. The next moment, the two of them disappeared. On the city wall. Dugu Xian hurriedly found Bai Shaoxian. Bai Shaoxian said softly, don't worry. The palace lord and Mr. Bai are already in pursuit. Dugu Xian's face was pale. The other world? Bai Shaoxian nodded. Dugu Xian clenched her right hand. Her expression was as cold as water. No one knew what she was thinking. Bai Shaoxian looked at Dugu Xian. I've always been curious. Dugu Xian said softly, what are you curious about? Bai Shaoxian looked at Dugu Xian. I've investigated. All the information on Yi Xian can only be found when he was half a year old. Before that, there was only one name on his father. No, only one word, young. Am I right? Bai Shaoxian was silent. Dugu Xian smiled and said, and the people of the Yi clan actually know nothing about him. If I'm not wrong, he might not be a member of the Yi clan. He's just hiding from something, or for some reason, the two of you placed him and his sister in the Yi clan. After all, the Yi clan has so many people and so many branches. It's easy to create the identity of an illegitimate child, right? Dugu Xian said softly, I'm afraid nothing in the never-ending starfield can be hidden from you, Miss Xian. Bai Shaoxian shook her head. There are many things I don't know. Take Yi Xian's father for example. Even though I used some special powers, I couldn't find out anything about him. And this young character of his was obtained from you. Dugu Xian looked at Bai Shaoxian. Bai Shaoxian said with a smile, when you were captured by the Dugu family, you said one word. That was it. Bai Shaoxian was silent. Dugu Xian said softly, his father should not be an ordinary person, right? Dugu Xian shook her head. When I first met him, he was just an ordinary person. Bai Shaoxian said softly, understood. You don't know his background either. Dugu Xian turned to look at the spatial crack in the sky and said softly, I just want him to be safe now. Bai Shaoxian said, don't worry, the other side forcefully kidnapped people in front of Palace Master this time. They will definitely suffer Palace Master's wrath. Dugu Xian looked at the crack in the sky without saying anything. Bai Xiaoxian also looked towards the crack in space. She frowned slightly. After so many years, have the people forgotten how terrifying Palace Master is? At this moment, Yi Xian found himself in a space cage. This space cage was shuttling through space at an extremely fast speed. Yi Xian was about to break it by force when Soul suddenly said, "Young master, don't move. You are currently shuttling through space at a high speed. This speed is not something you can bear. If you break it by force, you will be the first to die." Yi Xian's face sank. "So, I can't do anything now?" Soul hesitated for a moment and said, "Young master, why don't you cry? You will feel better if you cry." Yi Xian's face twitched. This Soul, at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly noticed that a space door had appeared in front of him. At the same time, he felt a powerful force attacking him from behind. The people from the Great Wall of Heaven. Yi Xian was delighted. At this moment, the space cage that imprisoned him instantly sped up. In an instant, he flew directly into the door of light, and the door instantly closed. At this moment, Wei Yang Tian rushed over. Just as the door was about to disappear, Wei Yang Tian stretched out his right hand and grabbed. Boom! The door that was about to disappear was directly grabbed by Wei Yang Tian. In the next moment, she pulled to both sides, and the closed door was pulled open by her. Then, she disappeared on the spot. At this moment, Mr. Bai and Ague arrived. The two looked at each other, and Mr. Bai said softly, "She is angry." Ague nodded slightly. Kidnapping people in front of her. Has the foreign land gone mad? Mr. Bai shook his head. I'm afraid it's not that simple. At this point, he seemed to think of something, and his face changed. Not good. This may be a trap. Their target is most likely not Yi Xian, but Palace Master. As soon as he finished speaking, he disappeared on the spot. At the same time, his voice came from afar. I will go to the foreign land. You go back and open the formation. On the spot, Ague turned and disappeared. After an unknown period of time, Yi Xian felt himself coming to a stop. He glanced at his surroundings. He was now on an altar, surrounded by 4 towering pillars. On the pillars, some unknown beasts were drawn. These beasts had ferocious faces and were glaring ferociously, as though they were about to devour anyone they saw. There was not a single person around him. Yi Xian frowned slightly. What was going on? At this moment, he suddenly turned around. The space in front of him suddenly trembled violently. Soon, the space split open, and a woman walked out. Seeing the woman, Yi Xian was stunned. He pointed at the woman and said in shock, "You." The woman walked up to Yi Xian. She looked at Yi Xian coldly, and then looked around. After a while, a cold smile appeared on her lips. So your target is not him, but me. At this moment, an illusory old man suddenly appeared on one of the giant pillars. The old man looked down at endless sky. Palace Master Endless, the foreign land does not want to be enemies with the never-ending star region. As long as the Palace Master hands Yi Xian to us, we will leave immediately and never step into the never-ending star region again. Endless Sky looked at the old man coldly. If not for the Moke clan's support, would the foreign land dare to lure me here? As she spoke, she looked around. Since when did the Moke clan become cowards? At this moment, a middle-aged man suddenly appeared in the air. The middle-aged man smiled. Palace Master Endless, long time no see. Endless Sky's expression was cold. MOU, so many years have passed. Do you still only know how to play tricks like this? The middle-aged man named MOU smiled. Palace Master Endless, intelligence is also a form of strength, isn't it? Endless Sky nodded. Then let me see your so-called strength. With that, she stomped her right foot. Boom! The entire altar shook violently. Behind her, Yi Xian felt dizzy, and his head almost exploded. However, there was nothing wrong with the altar at all. Endless Heaven's beautiful brows knit together slightly when she witnessed this scene. Meanwhile, Mou suddenly smiled and said, "Palace Master Endless, we're all aware of your strength. So, how could we possibly prepare a one for you?" Palace Master Endless, at this moment, Endless Sky suddenly said, "You talk too much." With that, she punched at Mou from afar. Boom! The space around Mou instantly shattered. At the same time, Mou instantly retreated thousands of feet away. Just as Endless Sky was about to attack again, the old man on the pillar suddenly stomped his right foot. Activate the array. With that, the entire pillar shook violently. Immediately after, a light screen suddenly appeared, trapping Yi Xian and Endless Sky on the altar. Wei Yang Tian raised his right hand and waved it gently. A powerful force swept out from his palm. This force was like a tidal wave that directly shook the light screen. Rumble. The entire altar started trembling violently. At the same time, the barrier of light exploded into pieces. However, right at this moment, the four pillars shook abruptly, and then the demon beasts inscribed on them suddenly came to life. In the next moment, those demon beasts pounced down towards Midnight Heaven, and for a time, all of them danced about wildly. Meanwhile, Yi Xian clearly felt the sky darken. Meanwhile, Endless Sky suddenly said, "Retreat! Retreat!" Yi Xian hurriedly laughed bitterly, "There's no place to retreat." Endless Sky frowned slightly. In the next moment, she appeared in front of Yi Xian. In the blink of an eye, she spread her right hand forward and slammed it upwards. Bang! At this moment, Yi Xian felt like the heavens and the earth were on the verge of collapsing. As soon as Endless Sky slammed her palm forward, shrill cries resounded in the sky. Especially the demon beasts at the front, they were instantly transformed into ashes, and the other demon beasts collapsed to the ground. However, the demon beasts on the four pillars seemed endless. All sorts of demon beasts kept appearing and pouncing towards Endless Sky. Endless Sky frowned slightly when she saw this, and then she stomped her right foot lightly. Bang! The entire altar shook violently, and then countless cracks appeared on it. However, Yi Xian spat out a few mouthfuls of blood. Endless Sky's frown deepened, and she held back a little. Meanwhile, Mou suddenly laughed, "Looks like you really care about him, Palace Master. You actually held back your strength. However, you might not know that the experts of my Moke clan are already on their way to the Great Wall of Heaven's burial. The longer you stay here, the more people from the Great Wall of Heaven's burial will die. Whether you protect the Great Wall of Heaven's burial, Never-Ending Starfield, or Yi Xian, it's up to you." Endless Sky said softly, "So your target is the Great Wall of Heaven?" Mou smiled. "Of course. With you guarding the Great Wall of Heaven's burial, the Moke clan will have to pay a huge price to take it down. Therefore, this is the only way to lure you here. Once the Great Wall of Heaven's burial is breached, the Moke clan's army will be able to march straight into Never-Ending Starfield." Endless Sky nodded slightly. "That's a good idea." Mou narrowed his eyes and smiled. "Palace Master, whether you want to protect the Great Wall of Heaven's burial or Yi Xian, it's up to you." Endless Sky slowly closed her eyes, and her right hand clenched tightly. No one knew what she was thinking. Behind her, Yi Xian also fell silent. Outside, Mou's lips curled into an inexplicable smile. Everything was under control. The entire place fell silent. P.S. Happy May Day, everyone. Chapter 465. On the altar, the demonic beasts stopped as well, staring at Wei Yang Tian and Yi Xian greedily, ready to attack at any moment. Wei Yang Tian stood at the center of the altar, his eyes closed, his thoughts unknown. And Yi Xian was behind Wei Yang Tian. After a while, Mou frowned when he saw that Endless Sky remained silent and didn't take any action. He stared at endless sky in the center of the altar. After a long time, he seemed to have thought of something, and his face changed. You're a clone. Clone. Wei Yang Tian opened his eyes and looked at Mou, his lips curling into a mocking smile. Seems like you're not that stupid after all. Hearing his words, Mou's face turned ugly, while Wei Yang Tian's lips curled up. Didn't you want to drag it out? Come, I'll accompany you. Mou glared at him coldly, before turning to leave. At this time, the old man on the pillar suddenly spoke up anxiously. Brother Mou, Mou stopped, replying softly, my apologies, I did not expect this. The old man's face darkened. Are you going to leave just like that? Mou laughed, of course not. Since my Moke clan has agreed to ally with the other side, we will not abandon our ally. As his voice rang out, a group of black-clothed men appeared around the pillar. There were about 20 of them, each of them wielding a black longbow, their arrows nocked. Mou spoke, Brother Guyu, she's just a clone, your side should be able to deal with her. Furthermore, Yi Xian is on the altar, if you want my Moke clan to act, that's fine. However, my Moke clan wants half of Yi Xian's treasures. Guyu's face changed, as he looked at Mou, smiling, Brother Mo is right, she's just a clone, my Moke clan can deal with her. There's no need to trouble you. Mou nodded, I'm going to the Great Wall of Burial Heavens, take care, Brother Gu. Guyu quickly replied, take care. Mou didn't say anything else and disappeared into the distance. After Mou disappeared, the black-clothed archers around the pillar also retreated. On the long pillar, the old man looked down at endless sky. Endless Palace Lord, I'll say it one last time. As long as you hand over Yi Xian, the foreign region will retreat immediately. We will never become enemies with Endless Star region. Wei Yang Tian coldly glanced at the old man, then looked at Yi Xian. Her right hand grabbed at Yi Xian from afar. With this grab, the space around Yi Xian began to condense. In the end, this space formed a barrier that protected Yi Xian. Seeing this, the expression of the old man on the pillar changed. Kill. At this time, Wei Yang Tian suddenly disappeared, and when she reappeared, she was already in front of a long pillar. Then, she slammed her palm on the pillar. Boom! The long pillar immediately shattered. For a time, the entire altar started to tremble violently. At the same time, countless demon beasts on the altar fell to the ground, and shrill cries resounded incessantly. Suddenly, a black shadow flew out from within Yi Xian's body. Emperor Hound. After the Emperor Hound emerged, it started to devour the demon beasts on the ground madly. Yi Xian, meanwhile, Wei Yang Tian had already appeared in front of a few other long pillars. It didn't take long for the pillars to shatter one after another, and countless demon beasts died miserably. As for the demon beasts, they couldn't get close to Wei Yang Tian at all. Especially now, when Wei Yang Tian attacked without any hesitation. The old man in the sky finally started to panic when he saw this scene. He hadn't expected Wei Yang Tian's clone to be so terrifying. This was just a clone. It didn't take long for the entire altar to shatter. However, the old man didn't hesitate to turn around and flee. In the sky, Wei Yang Tian stared coldly at the old man in the sky. Flee? I'm afraid you're dreaming. As soon as she finished speaking, she grabbed forward with her right hand and squeezed lightly. The old man's body shattered into pieces in the distant sky. Wei Yang Tian lowered her head to look at Yi Xian. Yi Xian spoke softly, Are you Wei Yang? Wei Yang Tian glanced coldly at Yi Xian, Go back. As soon as she finished speaking, she waved her right hand lightly, and the space in front of Yi Xian split apart. Yi Xian was just about to enter when the Emperor Hound suddenly said, Wait. Wait. Wait until I'm full. The corners of Yi Xian's mouth twitched when he heard this. Actually, he hadn't expected the Emperor Hound to suddenly awaken. After all, it had been in deep sleep until now. But that's fine. Having the Emperor Hound here is equivalent to having an extraordinary helper. Wei Yang Tian paid no further attention to Yi Xian and the Emperor Hound, and she just turned around and chased after them. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, but he didn't choose to follow her in the end. It would be utterly useless if he went over now, and he would only be a burden to her. As for the questions in his heart, he didn't choose to ask them now. However, if he wasn't wrong, then the Emperor Hound was probably the little girl he'd met in the sky world. Meanwhile, the Emperor Hound had finished devouring all the demon beast corpses that covered the ground. The Emperor Hound patted its stomach, and then it walked over to Yi Xian. It glanced at Yi Xian, and then it burped. Yi Xian was speechless. The Emperor Hound sized up Yi Xian. "Kid, you've become much stronger." Yi Xian smiled. "Let's go back first." The Emperor Hound suddenly said, "Why?" Yi Xian asked, "Why don't you go back?" The Emperor Hound glanced at the surroundings, and then it said, "I sense the aura of many demon beasts here. How about it? Are you interested in getting some?" Yi Xian spoke in a low voice, "Brother Emperor Hound, are you sure?" The Emperor Hound nodded, "Very sure." Yi Xian grinned, "That's exactly what I was thinking." Being captured by the Outlander territory was undoubtedly extremely grieving for him, and he was truly unwilling to return just like that. "Let's do it." The Emperor Hound returned to the pagoda while Yi Xian concealed his aura with chaotic energy. It didn't take long for him to vanish on the spot. He naturally wouldn't fight the Outlander territory head-on. Moreover, with his chaotic energy concealment ability, unless it was a top-rate expert, otherwise, no one would be able to discover him. Moreover, Wei Yang Tian had clearly gone to look for trouble with the Outlander territory's experts, so this was the best time for him. It didn't take long for Yi Xian to chase after Wei Yang Tian. It didn't take long for Yi Xian to arrive before an ancient city. Explosions resounded from time to time in the sky above the ancient city, and even the heavens and the earth trembled. Sensing this scene, the corners of Yi Xian's eyes twitched. Needless to say, Wei Yang Tian was definitely fighting with the Outlander territory's experts. Yi Xian didn't care that much, and directly snuck into the city. It didn't take long for him to arrive before the largest palace in the city, and above the palace were 3 black bags, Deviant Soul's palace. Yi Xian quietly snuck in, and he didn't sense any powerful aura in the palace. Clearly, the Outlander territory's experts had been pinned down by Wei Yang Tian. Yi Xian hurriedly snuck into the palace, and began to frantically loot. About a quarter of an hour later, Yi Xian left the palace, and just as he was about to leave, the Emperor Hound suddenly said, "Go to the right." Yi Xian asked, "Why?" The Emperor Hound said, "There are demonic beasts over there." Yi Xian thought for a moment, and then snuck to the right. He knew that the Emperor Hound could devour these demonic beasts. It should be able to recover from its injuries, but the Emperor Hound's injuries shouldn't be completely healed. Soon, Yi Xian arrived before an altar, which was exactly the same as the altar he had been trapped on before, and these long pillars were painted with the shapes of countless monsters. Yi Xian said in a low voice, "Brother Emperor Hound, they haven't been released yet." The Emperor Hound said, "Stupid, can't I go in?" As soon as it finished speaking, a black light flew out from Yi Xian's chest, and this black light instantly sank into one of the long pillars, and soon, the long pillar began to shake violently. Yi Xian turned to look at the distant horizon, and now he only hoped that Wei Yang Tian would be able to cause more trouble, or the Outlander territory's experts would most likely discover this place, and then he and the Emperor Hound wouldn't be able to escape. At this moment, the Emperor Hound ran out, and Yi Xian's body had become slightly larger. Yi Xian was just about to speak, but the Emperor Hound had directly charged into another long pillar. Yi Xian's face darkened. This fellow is addicted to eating. At this moment, the distant horizon suddenly shook violently, and Yi Xian hurriedly turned to look at the horizon. In the sky, Wei Yang Tian held a bloody head in her right hand, and not far from her stood a gray-clothed old man, and 4 enormous black dragons floated around the old man. The old man looked at Wei Yang Tian, and besides iciness, there was also a trace of fear in his eyes. The old man stared fixedly at Wei Yang Tian. Palace Mistress Wei Yang, our target is only that Yi Xian. Why do you have to do this for him? Wei Yang Tian suddenly raised her hand and waved, and the old man's expression changed, and he swiftly formed a seal with both hands. In an instant, the 4 enormous black dragons around him roared. Boom! 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 The surrounding space trembled, and it seemed like it was about to collapse. It was extremely shocking. A moment later, the sky returned to normal, and the gray-clothed old man had already retreated thousands of feet. The gray-clothed old man stared at Wei Yang Tian. Palace Mistress Wei Yang, the Moke clan's powerhouses are already attacking the Great Wall of Burial Skies. If you don't go back, your main body's strength will not be at its peak. Are you really going to fight to the death with the old man here? Wei Yang Tian slowly clenched her right hand, but said nothing. The gray-clothed old man continued, Palace Mistress Wei Yang, if your main body was here, the old man would indeed not be your match. However, you're just a clone, so I'm afraid it won't be that easy to kill the old man. As for the Great Wall of Burial Skies, if your never-ending Starfield painters don't take action, who can stop the Moke clan's powerhouse? Wei Yang Tian suddenly waved her right hand, and the distant space trembled. The gray-clothed old man retreated rapidly, and this time, he retreated thousands of feet. Wei Yang Tian did not choose to continue attacking. She turned and disappeared into the distant horizon. As Wei Yang Tian left, she looked coldly to the right. After she completely disappeared, a light laugh suddenly rang out not far to the right. Impressive. As the voice fell, the space suddenly split open, and a man covered in black flames walked out. The gray-clothed old man walked in front of the flaming man, and said softly, Is this the Palace Mistress Wei Yang? The gray-clothed old man nodded, yes. The flaming man said softly, Indeed very strong. The gray-clothed old man said, When will you attack? The flaming man shook his head, We've already informed the Void Spirit Star Palace. We're just waiting for their reply. As he spoke, he turned to look at the distant horizon. Our people should have already reached the Void Spirit Star Palace. In the distant starry sky, in a Star Palace hall, the Void Spirit Star Palace Palace Master stared at the black-clothed man in front of him. Yi Xian? Are you sure? The black-clothed man nodded, yes. He has that treasure on him. The Void Spirit Star Palace Palace Master leaned back in his chair, and after a moment, he said softly, Don't joke around. I still want to live for a few more years. Chapter 466. The black-robed man frowned. What is the meaning of this, Palace Master Lin Su? Lin Su shook his head, nothing. Go back. The black-robed man said solemnly, Palace Master Lin Su doesn't want the treasure? Lin Su smiled and said, Of course I want that kind of treasure, but, he waved his hand, you may leave. The black-robed man wanted to say something, but Lin Su frowned, You don't understand? The black-robed man didn't dare to say anything else and left. After the black-robed man left, a man walked in. It was Lin Songyun who had been to the firmament world. Lin Su shook his head, Why did those fellows provoke Yi Xian? Lin Songyun was taken aback, and then he said, Palace Lord, has the matter of Yi Xian possessing the treasure been completely exposed? Lin Su nodded, Almost all the surrounding starfields know. Lin Songyun's face sank, He's in big trouble. Lin Su shook his head, It's not just big, it's very big. Lin Songyun looked at Lin Su, What do you plan to do, Palace Master? Lin Su smiled, What plan? Just don't get involved. Lin Songyun fell silent. Lin Su smiled, You're thinking why we don't help? Lin Songyun nodded. Lin Su said softly, I, Fang Ciyuan, have also thought so. However, do you know who are the people and forces that are coveting his treasures this time? Lin Su said, Don't tell me they're involved as well. Lin Su smiled, All the powerful forces you know are involved. Now, we're the only ones left. Lin Songyun smiled bitterly. That fellow is really unlucky. Lin Su nodded, then he stood up and walked to the entrance of the hall. That's senior, Lin Songyun suddenly said. Uncle, I have an idea. Lin Su said, speak. Lin Songyun said, that senior's strength is beyond our imagination. It's very likely that she's from a Class 1 civilized starfield, or even a special civilized starfield. Since she cares about Yi Xian, she won't let him die. Lin Su frowned. Are you saying that she's training Yi Xian on purpose? Lin Songyun nodded his head. It's highly possible that's the case, and it's very likely that she's hiding in the shadows. At this time, if we lend a hand to that Yi Xian, we'll definitely be able to make her owe us a favor. Even if she doesn't owe us a favor, a friendship will do. A favor. Friendship. Lin Su suddenly clenched his right hand. The woman in the plain dress was so strong that it was unreasonable. If he could make her owe Spirit Void Star Palace a favor, it would undoubtedly be a great help to Spirit Void Star Palace. As Lin Songyun had said, even if there was no favor, a friendship would do. Thinking of this, Lin Su was a little tempted. But soon, he frowned. No, if we interfere, we will also be involved. Lin Songyun smiled and said, Uncle, we don't have to help them openly, but we can help them secretly, right? Lin Su was silent. Lin Songyun said, why not give it a try? Lin Su smiled and said, then you can lead them there. Lin Songyun said in a low voice, how many? Lin Su said softly, there's no point in bringing too many. The important thing is to bring the strong. Lin Songyun hurriedly said, bring the 12 celestial spirits? Lin Su nodded slightly. Let them go. They have never appeared before the eyes of the world. Even if they are discovered, they will be fine. As for you, you need to change your appearance. Lin Songyun nodded and was about to leave when Lin Su suddenly said, you can regret it now. Lin Songyun looked at Lin Su and smiled. I want to give it a try. Lin Su looked straight at Lin Songyun. You know, if you are exposed, I will not protect you. Lin Songyun smiled and said, I know, but I still want to give it a try, for myself and for Spirit Void Star Palace. Hearing this, Lin Su's heart softened and he said in a low voice, go. Lin Songyun turned and left. After Lin Songyun left, Lin Su suddenly said, the two of you follow him. If necessary, help him. Secretly, the two left. Lin Su looked at the distant horizon and said softly, why must you go and torment that brat? Isn't it better to be alive? Foreign domain. After Wei Yang Tian left, Yi Xian hurriedly called the Emperor Hound out, and then he dragged the Emperor Hound and ran. He could already sense that Wei Yang Tian had left. If he continued to torment him, then it would be pure stupidity. Although the Emperor Hound did not want to leave, Yi Xian did not allow it to do as it wished and forcefully dragged it away. However, he tragically discovered one thing. The door that endless heaven had torn open for him previously had disappeared. Disappeared. How do I go back? Yi Xian was dumbfounded. At this moment, a figure suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. It was Wei Yang Tian. Wei Yang Tian glanced at Yi Xian. You haven't left yet? Yi Xian smiled sheepishly. Wait for you to come with me. Wei Yang Tian looked coldly at Yi Xian. Nonsense. With that, she waved her right hand and the space in front of her split open. In the next moment, she carried Yi Xian into the spatial crack. Soon, Yi Xian, the Emperor Hound, and Wei Yang Tian began to travel through space. Yi Xian hesitated, then asked, Wei Yang Tian was expressionless. Yi Xian said, the one I met in Azure Firmament World was you, right? Wei Yang Tian did not speak. Just as Yi Xian was about to speak, Wei Yang Tian suddenly said, that treasure has recognized you as its owner? Yi Xian nodded. Yes. Wei Yang Tian looked at Yi Xian. Do you know how many people are eyeing it now? Yi Xian smiled bitterly. I know. Saying this, he shook his head. Wei Yang, to be honest, I don't really want this thing. This treasure had brought him many benefits, but at the same time, it had brought him many disadvantages. If it were not for the plain-dressed woman suppressing this tower from the start, he would have been long dead. And now, the 5th floor was not a pushover. He did not know if he would explode on the spot one day. Wei Yang Tian looked at Yi Xian. Why? Yi Xian said in a low voice, this treasure is both a blessing and a curse, a great curse. If those people knew how dangerous this thing is, they would not come for it even if you beat them to death. From the beginning until now, the 2nd floor's god, the 3rd floor's Jian Zizai. These man and beast did not kill him at the start because of the plain-dressed woman, especially the 2nd floor's god. This guy really wanted to kill him from the start. Apart from that, the tower had also trembled a few times. If it were not for the sword at the top of the tower, he would have been long dead. In short, he had survived until now because someone was protecting him and he was lucky. Although this was very hurtful, it was the truth. Wei Yang Tian said softly, this tower of yours does not belong to this world. Yi Xian nodded. It's not from our never-ending starfield. However, I do not know where it came from. Wei Yang Tian glanced at Yi Xian, then at the Emperor Hound. You are a monster from that endless purgatory? The Emperor Hound glanced at Wei Yang Tian and nodded slightly. It still respected Unending Sky, because Unending Sky was very strong, and it couldn't beat him right now. Wei Yang Tendo said, I went to that endless purgatory years ago. In the deepest part of it, there lived a powerful soul. As she spoke, she looked at Yi Xian. You have seen him? Yi Xian nodded. He knew that Wei Yang Tian was probably talking about the Netherworld King. Wei Yang Tian wanted to say something else, but at this time, she suddenly looked up. Not far away from them, a middle-aged man had appeared out of nowhere. However, this middle-aged man was illusory, not his real body. The middle-aged man smiled. Palace Master Wei Yang, it's been a long time. Wei Yang Tian said indifferently, Mo Tian Xing, are you going to stop me here? Mo Tian Xing smiled. Yes, please enlighten me, Palace Master. As soon as he finished speaking, he opened his palm, and a pitch-black mirror appeared in his hand. He formed a seal with his left hand and silently chanted an incantation. At this moment, Wei Yang Tian, who stood by Yi Xian's side, suddenly slapped her palm on Yi Xian's shoulder, and Yi Xian flew directly into the distance. Yi Xian was stunned. At this moment, Wei Yang Tian's voice resounded in his mind. Return to the Great Wall of Heavens immediately. In the spatial rift, Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, then turned around and teleported into the distance. Teleporting was still a little taxing for him, but fortunately, he had the Space Dao Law, so he could just barely do it. Yi Xian sped up, and soon, a series of explosions came from behind him. Suddenly, the Emperor Hound said, Get on. Yi Xian leaped onto the Emperor Hound's back, and then it charged forward at an extremely swift speed. The Emperor Hound said, Kid, they seem to be trying to stop her clone from returning. Yi Xian nodded. Her clone is here, so her main body strength is probably unable to reach its peak. That's probably their objective. His face fell when he spoke up to this point, I'm their objective on the surface, but they're actually trying to keep her busy. I can be said to have dragged her down this time. The Emperor Hound asked, How do you know her? Yi Xian replied, I met her in the mortal world. The Emperor Hound fell silent for a short moment, and then it said, I noticed that while you're as weak as a chicken, why are all the people you know so strong? Kid, were you a great expert in your previous life? Is that why you're so blessed in this lifetime? Yi Xian was speechless. At this moment, Soul suddenly said, Actually, the young mistress has many good points. Yi Xian hurriedly said, Don't say it, I don't want to hear it. Soul was puzzled. Why not? I feel that although the young mistress is very weak, she's really good to her family and friends. It's just that, her skin is too thick, so thick that I don't even know how to describe it. Yi Xian was speechless. Ha! The Emperor Hound suddenly burst into laughter. Yi Xian was about to speak, but at this moment, the Emperor Hound suddenly stopped. Not far in front of them stood a middle-aged man in a white robe. This person was the Holy Lord. The Holy Lord looked coldly at Yi Xian, and he was about to speak when Yi Xian suddenly said, "Kill him. P.S. Sorry, I'm 10 minutes late today. Because there was an error in yesterday's article, I check it twice every time I update it. If there's an error, please post it in the circle, or contact me, I'll correct it in time." Chapter 467. As soon as Yi Xian's voice resounded, the Emperor Hound charged at the Hallowed Lord. Yi Xian held tightly onto the sword at his waist while he stood on the back of the Emperor Hound, and he was accumulating strength while waiting to attack. The Hallowed Lord's gaze gradually turned icy cold when he saw the Emperor Hound and Yi Xian charging at him. In next to no time, he raised his right hand slightly. In an instant, the space before him rippled like waves. At the same time, strands of powerful spatial energy surged incessantly towards the Emperor Hound and Yi Xian. The Emperor Hound and Yi Xian were getting closer and closer. In next to no time, Yi Xian suddenly leaped up, drew his sword, and slashed. The Emperor Hound was charging at the front, and this collision caused the space in front of it and Yi Xian to shatter. Yi Xian had successfully arrived in front of the Hallowed Lord, and he swiftly drew his sword. The howl of a sword shook the sky. The Hallowed Lord gazed coldly at Yi Xian. He clenched his right hand slowly, and then he smashed his fist forward. At the instant that his fist shot forward, a strand of sword light silently arrived before him. This strand of sword light had appeared without a sound. The Hallowed Lord's expression instantly changed when he witnessed this scene, and he changed the direction of his fist to block above his head. Bang! The sword light slashed directly against the Hallowed Lord's fist, and the Hallowed Lord was pushed back a few meters. Meanwhile, the Emperor Hound had smashed directly into the Hallowed Lord, and the Hallowed Lord swiftly raised his hands to block. Bang! The Hallowed Lord was blasted 300 m away by the Emperor Hound's attack. As soon as the Hallowed Lord's figure stopped, Yi Xian had appeared in front of him, and then a strand of sword light slashed down towards the Hallowed Lord's face. The Hallowed Lord's expression suddenly became ferocious. In the next moment, he clenched his right hand into a fist and smashed it upwards. His fist was like an erupting volcano, and a powerful force forcefully shattered Yi Xian's sword light. However, a strand of flying sword had soundlessly slashed down towards the Hallowed Lord's head. A flying sword. Hiss! The strand of sword light slashed down from the Hallowed Lord's head. However, the Hallowed Lord's body didn't split into two like Yi Xian had. Instead, his body had become illusory, and then he'd appeared over 1 kilometer away. Seeing this, Yi Xian frowned. In the distance, the Holy Lord glared at Yi Xian and the Monarch Hound. His face was ugly to the extreme. He never imagined that he would be forced into such a corner by Yi Xian and the Monarch Hound. Just as the Emperor Dog was about to attack again, a black shadow suddenly attacked from behind. The Saint Lord turned around abruptly, and when he saw the figure, his face changed. He turned around and disappeared. Soon, a black figure appeared in front of Yi Xian and the Emperor Hound. It was a Gui. Yi Xian was about to speak when a Gui suddenly said, "Let's go back first." Yi Xian said in a low voice, "Wei Yang." A Gui was taken aback by the way Yi Xian addressed him, but he didn't think too much about it and said, "They can't do anything to you. Come with me now." Yi Xian nodded, "Let's go." Soon, Yi Xian, a Gui, and the Emperor Hound passed through the spatial tunnel and returned to the Burial Sky Great Wall. When they arrived at the Burial Sky Great Wall, Yi Xian's face changed. At this moment, outside the Burial Sky Great Wall, there were several huge spatial teleportation arrays, and one could vaguely see a passage in them. On the city wall, Yi Xian looked at Ague. Senior, this is? Ague said in a low voice, spatial teleportation. The Moke clan's army will be teleported here through this spatial tunnel. Yi Xian said in a low voice, they still have an army? Ague looked at Yi Xian. The Moke clan isn't a single clan, it's made up of countless clans. As he spoke, he looked up at the horizon, and there were tremors from time to time. Yi Xian said, they're fighting? Ague nodded. Yi Xian was about to speak, but at this moment, a group of people suddenly appeared in the largest spatial teleportation array nearby, led by Immerse. Beside Immerse, Yi Xian also saw a familiar person, Immerse, who fought him before. Ague said softly, they're here. At this time, people appeared above the burial sky great wall. Yi Xian glanced at them. There were many familiar faces, and many unfamiliar faces. Clearly, Mr. Bai and Ague had summoned back the unending geniuses who were outside. At this time, Ague suddenly said beside Yi Xian, next is your battlefield. As he spoke, he quietly retreated. Yi Xian looked down. Clearly, it was the old against the old, and the young against the young. Neither side could afford to lose. If the older ones lost, such as Never-Ending Sky and the others, they would definitely die. If the younger ones lost, the Never-Ending Starfield would have no future. Moreover, the geniuses of the Moke clan would be able to enter the Never-Ending Starfield. When that time came, the old generation would be held back, and no one could stop them. Below, Immerse led Swordsman and the others to the city wall, but soon, they rose into the air and came to the opposite side of the city wall, facing Yi Xian and the others from afar. Yi Xian noticed that apart from Immerse and the others, he also noticed the black-robed man who fought with him earlier. Ever since he appeared, his eyes had been locked on him. Yi Xian flashed his middle finger at the black-robed man. In the distance, the black-robed man was instantly enraged. He pointed at Yi Xian and said, Yi Xian, come out and die. On the city wall, Yi Xian leaped and came in front of the black-robed man. Yi Xian smiled and said, let me say this first. If you are afraid of death, get someone else. I really don't want to fight with someone who runs away after fighting. The black-robed man glared at Yi Xian. You are too arrogant, you. Yi Xian suddenly shook his head. If you want to fight, then fight. Don't talk so much nonsense. At the side, Swordsman suddenly said, Brother Tsangyu, if you don't want to fight, then let me do it. As he said that, he walked out. The black-robed man named Tsangyu said in a deep voice, he is from the foreign land. Besides Swordsman, Tian Sha suddenly said angrily, then hurry up and fight. If you don't fight, others will think that the Moke clan is afraid of Yi Xian. Di Sha, who rarely spoke, also nodded slightly. If you don't dare to fight, the Moke clan will do it ourselves. The black-robed man and the woman behind him had an ugly expression on their faces. Contempt. They could feel that the Moke clan and the Never-Ending Star region were looking down on them. The woman behind Tsangyu was about to attack, but Tsangyu stopped her. Let me do it. After saying that, he disappeared into thin air. When he reappeared, he was already in front of Yi Xian. Tsangyu looked at Yi Xian and was about to speak. At that moment, a ray of sword gleam came quietly. The sword gleam was silent like the air. When he felt the sword gleam, Tsangyu's expression changed drastically. He put his hands together and a black and blue shield appeared in front of him. The sword arrived. Boom! The shield shattered instantly. However, at that moment, Tsangyu took a quick step forward and threw a punch. On his fist, a powerful force swept out. At that moment, a ray of sword gleam arrived. Boom! The moment the sword and fist collided, Tsangyu retreated rapidly. In the process of his retreat, a ray of sword gleam quietly arrived. A flying sword again. Tsangyu's pupils constricted. He stomped his right foot and borrowed the power of space to stop himself. Forcing himself to stop, he slapped his chest with both hands. Boom! Sang Yu's body trembled violently. Immediately after, a powerful aura swept out from his body. After this powerful aura appeared, the surrounding space instantly began to tremble. Everyone's gaze turned to this side. Zhua Qing said softly, "Secret technique." Mo Xia nodded slightly. The people of this region are all good at secret techniques. It's a pity that there isn't any ancient secret technique. If there is an ancient secret technique, Zhua Qing looked at Mo Xia. Mo Xia smiled. If it's an ancient secret technique, even I would have to be wary. In the distance, Sang Yu's body grew bigger and bigger. In a short period of time, his body grew at least a few times bigger than before. At the same time, his aura was more than a few times stronger than before. Sang Yu stared fixedly at Yi Xian. In the next moment, he charged towards Yi Xian. Every single step he took caused the space here to tremble violently. It was an extremely shocking scene. Yi Xian stood there silently with his sword in hand. When Sang Yu arrived before him, Yi Xian suddenly leaped up, drew his sword, and slashed down. "OM!" A sword howl resounded through the sky. A wisp of ridicule arose on the corners of Sang Yu's mouth when he saw Yi Xian's sword slashing down. He smashed his fist forward, and the powerful force caused the space in an area of a few hundred meters to tremble as if it was on the verge of shattering. It was an extremely shocking scene. On the other hand, Yi Xian's sword continued to descend. However, his sword had suddenly transformed into the soul-suppressing sword. Boom! A figure was blasted flying. It was none other than Yi Xian. However, everyone was looking at Sang Yu. After Sang Yu blasted Yi Xian away with a punch, his soul was separated from his body. Not only that, but his soul was also fixed on the spot, unable to move. Sang Yu's soul looked around in terror, and his face was filled with confusion. Everyone was also slightly confused. What's going on? In the distance, Yi Xian stood up. He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and looked at Sang Yu. Sang Yu glared at Yi Xian. "What did you do to me?" Yi Xian grinned. He raised the soul-suppressing sword and said softly, "Withdraw." As soon as he finished speaking, Sang Yu's soul directly turned into a black ray of light and entered the soul-suppressing sword. The entire place fell silent. Mo Xia and the rest also looked at Yi Xian. Zhua Qing said solemnly, "What sword is that?" Mo Xia said softly, "It should be the legendary soul-suppressing sword. According to ancient records, this sword is the sword of the Nether clan's Nether King that disappeared. How did it fall into his hands?" Strange, as he spoke, he looked at Zhua Qing. "If you fight him, be careful of this sword. It's extremely destructive to the soul. Although your physique is special, don't underestimate your opponent." Zhua Qing nodded. "I understand." In the distance, after Yi Xian used the soul-suppressing sword to absorb Sang Yu's soul, he turned around and walked away. Zhua Qing, who stood beside Mo Xia, said in a deep voice, "I'll attack." As soon as he finished speaking, Mo Xia suddenly said, "Someone's coming." A voice suddenly resounded in the sky, "The Outlander isn't dead yet. It's not your Mo clan's turn to attack." As soon as the voice resounded, the space in the sky split open, and then a man holding a spear walked out. The man wore plain clothes, and the spear in his hand was wrapped in cloth. His eyes were as sharp as a knife. Mo Xia chuckled. "You're finally here?" Chapter 468. In the air, the spear-wielding man slowly walked towards Yi Xian. Soon, he arrived in front of Yi Xian. He was about to attack when Yi Xian suddenly said, "I want to heal my injuries." Everyone, the spear-wielding man was also stunned. "Heal your injuries?" Yi Xian nodded. "I was seriously injured in the battle with the Outlander geniuses just now, Are you trying to take advantage of me? Hearing this, the spear-wielding man's expression suddenly turned ugly. Am I, Yi Ji, the kind of person who would take advantage of others? You. Yi Xian hurriedly said, that's good. I'm leaving then. With that, he turned and left without any hesitation. Everyone, the man called Yi Ji was also a little dumbfounded. Obviously, he had not expected Yi Xian to do this. At that moment, a man appeared in front of Yi Ji. It was Zhou Xingsheng. Zhou Xingsheng glanced at Yi Ji and gently turned the spear in his hand. I play with spears. You play with spears too. Let's have a spar. Yi Ji said calmly, I'll keep you company. Zhou Xingsheng grinned. With a shake of his body, he directly charged towards Yi Ji. In next to no time, numerous explosions resounded incessantly. On the other side, Zhou Qing, who was beside Mo Xie, suddenly said, what now? Mo Xie smiled. Fight. Hearing this, the heaven fiends and earth fiends behind him flew to the opposite side. At that moment, two people suddenly flew out from the city walls. Soon, both sides began to fight. Meanwhile, Yi Xian had already returned to the stone house. He sat cross-legged on the ground, took out the purple source crystals, and began to absorb them crazily. The emperor dog had also entered the prison pagoda and was also digesting them crazily. In the prison pagoda, the only person who was relatively free was Xiaoling. She was now nurturing her spirit fruits and spirit trees every day, especially the third and fourth floors, which were filled with spirit trees. There was originally no one on the third floor, so naturally, it became hers. As for the fourth floor, after Jian Zizai left, it also became hers. However, the only thing she was afraid of was the fifth floor. Every time she went to the fourth floor to water the spirit fruits, she was very fast and would run out in no time. Seeing that Yi Xian was recuperating, Xiaolinger did not disturb him. She sat opposite Yi Xian and looked at Yi Xian with her chin resting on her hands. 2 hours later, when Yi Xian had recovered from his injuries, Xiaolinger hurriedly ran to him. Yi Xian gently rubbed Xiaolinger's little head. Are you worried about the fifth floor? Xiaolinger shook her head. I'm not afraid. Yi Xian smiled and said, I know, Xiaolinger is very courageous. Lil Linger blinked. Then, as if by magic, she took out a red fruit and handed it to Yi Xian. Eat it. Yi Xian took the fruit and looked at it. The fruit was crystal clear and exuded a strong fruity fragrance. At first glance, he could tell that it was not an ordinary item. Yi Xian took a bite. It was very sweet and crispy. Most importantly, he felt a wave of energy enter his body and then be absorbed by it. Good stuff. Yi Xian looked at Xiaolinger and said with a smile, thank you. Xiaolinger grinned, then turned around and went to the second floor with a few spirit fruits in her arms. Unknowingly, she had already regarded Yi Xian and the god on the second floor as her family. After Yi Xian finished eating the spirit fruit, he came to the side of the emperor hound. The emperor hound was lying on the ground, constantly exuding a powerful aura around its body. Yi Xian knew that the emperor hound should also be upgraded. It should be noted that it had devoured a lot of demon beasts in the foreign territory. The foreign territory. If this chapter is not finished, please continue to the next page. Thinking of the foreign territory, Yi Xian quickly took out a storage ring. Inside the storage ring was the treasure he had obtained in the foreign territory. In fact, he did not obtain any good treasures in the foreign territory. He only obtained a few sacred weapons and a little more than 30 million purple origin crystals. Although he was a little disappointed, Yi Xian also knew that this was normal. After all, the really good treasures were definitely kept close to the person and would not be placed in the house. However, it was still better than nothing. Especially now, he also needed purple origin crystals, because every time he healed or broke through, he needed a huge amount of purple origin crystals. Yi Xian glanced at the emperor hound and did not disturb it. Just as he was about to leave, the god on the second floor suddenly said, "Come." Yi Xian looked up at the second floor, and the next moment, he directly appeared on the second floor. In the second floor, the god on the second floor said in a deep voice, "At most half a month." Yi Xian was puzzled. "What do you mean?" The god on the second floor looked at him. "At most half a month, the fifth floor will be able to come out." Hearing this, Yi Xian's face suddenly darkened. "Can you stop that guy?" The god on the second floor shook his head. "Not only can I not stop it, even Jian Zizai will not be able to. Bullsh *t. At this time, the Emperor Hound on the first floor suddenly said angrily, "What is the fifth floor? How can she not stop it?" The god on the second floor glanced down. "You know nothing about the power of the fifth floor." The Emperor Hound sneered, "You know nothing about the Protoss." At this time, the god on the second floor suddenly disappeared. Boom! A loud noise suddenly came from the first floor, and then Yi Xian heard the Emperor Hound wailing. Yi Xian shook his head. Although this Emperor Hound was very powerful, his intuition told him that the god on the second floor was even more terrifying. This was because the god on the second floor was locked up here, and in the entire Protoss, only Jian Zizai was qualified to be locked up here. This Emperor Hound provoked the god on the second floor, and it was asking for abuse. A moment later, the god on the second floor returned to the second floor. She glanced at Yi Xian. "Is there a problem?" Yi Xian quickly shook his head. "No problem." He did not forget that the god on the second floor had a hotter temper than Jian Zizai. The god on the second floor glanced coldly at Yi Xian. "In half a month, either you find the Dao rule or bring her back with that sword, or you will die." Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "Do I have no chance of winning?" The god on the second floor said calmly, "Tell me, what are your chances of winning? They can pinch you to death with one finger." Yi Xian was expressionless. "I can perish together with them." The god on the second floor said, "Detonate the world prison tower?" Yi Xian nodded. The god on the second floor looked at Yi Xian with pity. What will you use to detonate this tower? You can die 100 times, and this tower will not have a problem." Yi Xian's face sank. "So, if I die, this tower will not care about me, right?" The god on the second floor said calmly, "What do you think?" Yi Xian was expressionless. "Then I will give it away. I don't want it anymore." The god on the second floor twitched her eyes and shook her head slightly. "You can be considered a talent." Yi Xian. The god on the second floor said, "Do you really put all your hopes on others?" Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then said, "What can I do?" "You tell me. If I go to the fifth floor now, I won't be able to beat him. Anyway, I have decided. And then if I have to die, I'll fuck him as hard as I can, and this chapter is not finished. Please turn the page. The 7th, 8th, and 9th floor will be released and everyone will have fun together." The god on the second floor looked at Yi Xian, and Yi Xian said seriously, "I really think so. Many times, many things could not be done by human strength." When faced with such a situation, Yi Xian made up his mind, that was to die together with everyone. Anyway, he had already prepared for the worst. After all, he really could not beat him. At least not now. And in the future. He was also very clear, it was very likely that there would be no future. The god on the second floor suddenly waved his hand, "Go out." Yi Xian turned and left. When he walked to the door, he suddenly stopped, then said softly, "Second floor god, you have helped me enough. You can leave at any time, really." After that, he disappeared at the door. He had always been grateful to the god on the second floor. Because the god had indeed helped him too much, and now, he really did not have the face to let him fight with the fifth floor. Because the fifth floor's target should be him and the tower. Therefore, if the god on the second floor wanted to leave, especially now, the fifth floor would definitely not target her. As for himself, he did not think too much. He was indifferent to life and death, and he would fight if he was not satisfied. After Yi Xian left the prison tower, he came to the burial sky Great Wall. At the moment, below, Yi Ji and Zhou Xingsheng were already fighting fiercely. Both of them were using spears, and the battle was extremely intense. On the other side, Sky Sha and Earth Sha were also fighting with two never-ending star region geniuses. These two geniuses Yi Xian had never seen before. They were two men, and both were extremely strong. However, they were completely suppressed by Sky Sha and Earth Sha, and could only defend passively. If this continued, defeat was only a matter of time. Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then turned to look at Immerse not far away. This Immerse gave him a feeling that she was unfathomable. He had only felt this from some old monsters. As if sensing Yi Xian's gaze, Immerse suddenly looked at him. Seeing Yi Xian, Immerse smiled slightly. Behind Immerse, the red-haired woman suddenly said, "I will go fight him." Immerse frowned slightly. "Ah Feng." Hearing this, the woman stopped and looked at Immerse. "Are you afraid that I can't beat him?" Immerse shook his head. "You have other opponents. He is Zhuo Qing's." As he spoke, he looked at Zhuo Qing. Zhuo Qing nodded slightly, then walked towards Yi Xian not far away. Ah Feng said coldly, "Can't you let me have him? I have been unhappy with him for a long time." Immerse said, "Think of the big picture." Big picture. Ah Feng humphed coldly and did not say anything else. In the distance, Zhuo Qing walked in front of Yi Xian. He looked at Yi Xian and smiled. "Last time was considered a draw, right?" Yi Xian nodded slightly, "Yes." Just as Zhuo Qing said, the last time, the two of them could only be considered a draw. Zhuo Qing smiled and said, "Then this time, let's decide the winner." As he spoke, he slowly raised his right hand. In an instant, the spiritual energy between heaven and earth began to gather at this moment. Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then looked up at Zhuo Qing and smiled. "What's the point of deciding the winner? Let's fight to the death." Fight to the death. As soon as Yi Xian's voice fell, the sound of a sword soared into the sky, straight into the clouds, and shook the sky. P.S. I went out for a walk in the past 2 days. There are really a lot of people in the city. Also, I don't think it's suitable for me to play in my line of work because I have to carry a computer everywhere I go. End of this chapter. Chapter 469. At this moment, the gazes of countless people moved towards Yi Xian and Zhuo Qing. Yi Xian walked towards Zhuo Qing with his sword in hand. Zhuo Qing opened his right hand, and a saber suddenly appeared in his grasp. The saber was over 1 m long, and its back was extremely wide. It seemed like a machete. At this moment, Yi Xian in the distance suddenly disappeared. At the instant that Yi Xian vanished, Zhuo Qing slowly closed his eyes. In the next moment, he took a step forward and swung his saber with both hands. Hiss! Space was fragile like paper before this strike, and it was directly torn apart. Meanwhile, Yi Xian's sword arrived before him. It was a head-on collision. Bang! An explosion suddenly resounded, and then the space in the surroundings trembled violently. After that, both of them retreated explosively. At the moment that Yi Xian retreated, a ray of light silently flashed. Zhuo Qing's expression instantly changed drastically. However, he reacted extremely quickly because he'd been prepared for it. So, he'd raised his saber to block it as soon as Yi Xian's flying sword had appeared. Bang! The flying sword arrived before him, causing his saber to tremble violently, and then Zhuo Qing retreated repeatedly again. However, he hadn't even stopped when Yi Xian appeared in front of him once more. After that, he saw Yi Xian suddenly draw his sword. Zhuo Qing's eyes narrowed slightly, and he'd already thought of numerous ways to deal with it. But right at this moment, Yi Xian's sword left its sheath. Zhuo Qing's saber slashed horizontally. However, Yi Xian's soul had suddenly left its sheath as well. At this moment, it wasn't just one Yi Xian, but two. This sudden and unexpected event caused Zhuo Qing's expression to change, and he decisively chose to attack Yi Xian's body. However, Yi Xian's soul's sword was even swifter, and it slashed towards his head. Zhuo Qing had no choice but to switch from offense to defense, and he raised his saber horizontally. Bang! The sword descended. Zhuo Qing retreated rapidly, and Yi Xian's soul had already returned to his body. At the same time, a flying sword pierced through Zhuo Qing's chest. When Yi Xian appeared in front of Zhuo Qing again, Zhuo Qing suddenly disappeared. Yi Xian suddenly turned around, and a broadsword slashed at his head. Yi Xian gently tapped the ground with the tip of his foot, and his whole body flashed 100 feet behind him. Zhuo Qing's saber still fell, and a saber chi flashed across the field like lightning. Yi Xian raised his sword and stabbed. Boom! The saber energy shattered with a loud bang. Opposite Yi Xian, Zhuo Qing glanced at her abdomen. There was a sword hole there, but it was healing at an extremely fast rate. Zhuo Qing looked up at Yi Xian, who was not far away, and said softly, "Your sword is really fast. Also, the combination of your soul and your physical body is indeed incredible." Yi Xian said, "Your physique is very special." Under normal circumstances, his sword could have taken Zhuo Qing's life. However, it seemed that Zhuo Qing was completely fine. Zhuo Qing smiled and said, "Let's continue." With that, he suddenly charged at Yi Xian with the long saber in hand. His speed became faster and faster, and when he arrived in front of Yi Xian, there was a row of afterimages behind him. That was because he was too fast. Soon, Zhuo Qing arrived in front of Yi Xian, and he slashed at Yi Xian with the saber in both hands. Annihilation. As the saber fell, a black saber light quietly condensed on the blade. In an instant, the space where the blade passed was directly shattered and annihilated. In front of Zhuo Qing, the ground beneath Yi Xian's feet suddenly began to tremble. Soon, an immeasurable amount of earth energy converged towards him. At the same time, the space energy in the surrounding space converged towards him like a tide. Soon, Yi Xian drew his sword and slashed. Hum! A sword hum shook the sky. Boom! The space around Yi Xian and Zhuo Qing was directly shattered. At the same time, Yi Xian and Zhuo Qing retreated rapidly, and as Yi Xian retreated, flying swords flew towards Zhuo Qing from a short distance away. These flying swords were extremely fast, and they were all aimed at Zhuo Qing's vital points. These flying swords were extremely fast, and they were all aimed at Zhuo Qing's vital points. In front of Yi Xian, Zhuo Qing retreated rapidly, and at the same time, the large saber in his hand kept slashing horizontally. At this moment, Yi Xian's figure trembled, and he directly rushed towards Zhuo Qing. As he rushed over, countless flying swords flew towards Zhuo Qing. On the other side, Mo Xia frowned slightly. Beside Mo Xia, the woman named Ah Feng said in a deep voice, "Zhuo Qing is being suppressed." As she spoke, she looked at Yi Xian. "This person's flying sword is so fast." Mo Xia nodded slightly. "In terms of speed, it's indeed not bad." As he spoke, he looked at Zhuo Qing with a trace of worry in his eyes. At this moment, a loud noise suddenly came from afar. As the loud noise resounded, Yi Xian and Zhuo Qing retreated rapidly. After Zhuo Qing stopped, a ray of sword light quietly appeared in front of him. Zhuo Qing's expression changed drastically, and he suddenly clasped his hands together. Boom! The clasping of his hands directly blocked a flying sword, but he was forced to retreat rapidly. At the same time, numerous flying swords pierced through his body, and one of them even pierced through the space between his eyebrows. As everyone watched, Zhuo Qing only stopped after retreating a full 300 meters. At this moment, Zhuo Qing's entire body was pierced by flying swords. Everyone's expression changed when they saw this scene. Flying swords. Fear. Deep fear. Even the woman named Ah Feng's eyes were filled with fear. Not only were these flying swords powerful, but they were also fast, making them impossible to defend against. At this moment, everyone suddenly looked at Swordsman, and under everyone's astonished gazes, Swordsman's body actually began to rapidly recover. Seeing this scene, the faces of the geniuses above buried Sky City immediately darkened. Was he unkillable? Yi Xian's expression was also somewhat ugly. Just now, his flying swords had struck Swordsman's vital points, but even so, they still couldn't kill him? Was he really unkillable? Not far away, Swordsman took a deep breath. At this moment, the sword wounds on his body had all healed, but his face was much paler. Swordsman looked at the distant Yi Xian, and his hands slowly clenched. For a moment, the surrounding space began to tremble violently. In the distance, Yi Xian said in a low voice, "Little soul, do you know what kind of physique he has? Is it an invincible physique?" Little soul said, "I don't know." Yi Xian, at this moment, the god on the second floor suddenly said, "It should be the legendary immortal physique." Yi Xian's face was full of black lines. Is he really unkillable? The god on the second floor said softly, "Of course not. If I'm not mistaken, what you see now is not this person's true body." Not his true body. Yi Xian frowned slightly. What do you mean? The god on the second floor said, "What you see now is condensed from the chi of heaven and earth. Your sword can only consume him, but can't kill him at all. Unless you kill him more than 100 times and completely exhaust him to death." Yi Xian's face darkened. Damn, isn't this physique invincible? The god on the second floor said, "Your physique and bloodline are even more terrifying than his." Yi Xian was stunned, then asked, "What kind of physique do I have? Didn't Little Soul say that I have an ordinary physique?" The god on the second floor said, "Did I say anything?" Yi Xian, at this moment, Yi Xian found that the surrounding space began to tremble violently. Soon, the surrounding space cracked, and endless dark matter energy seeped out from these spaces. Seeing this, Yi Xian's face darkened. As if thinking of something, the Tao of space suddenly condensed between his eyebrows. The next moment, the surrounding space directly healed at the speed of an international card. Everyone looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian gently waved his right hand, and all the space in the field returned to normal. Everyone, opposite Yi Xian, Swordsman looked at Yi Xian. His big move was gone just like that. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly walked towards Swordsman with his sword. Swordsman slowly clenched his right hand, and a powerful force condensed in his hand. Yi Xian suddenly leaped, directly above Swordsman's head. The next moment, he held the sword with both hands and slashed at Swordsman. Chi! As the sword fell, there was a sharp tearing sound. In front of Yi Xian, Swordsman suddenly blasted a punch at Yi Xian. Break! The punch was thrown. Boom! The space in front of Yi Xian was directly shattered, and Yi Xian was knocked back. However, several sword flashes directly slashed at Swordsman's body, and Swordsman also retreated. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly rushed in front of him, and the next moment, sword flashes crisscrossed. Countless sword flashes wrapped around Swordsman like a huge net. The two began to fight hand to hand, and a series of explosions sounded continuously in the field. Yi Xian knew very well that he had no way of finding Swordsman's real body. Therefore, he could only exhaust Swordsman to death. After the two began to fight in close combat, Yi Xian began to crush Swordsman in all aspects. Because of his soul separation and flying sword, Swordsman was beginning to be unable to block them. Just like that, Swordsman began to retreat. Not far away, Immerse looked at Yi Xian and Swordsman expressionlessly. No one knew what he was thinking. Next to Immerse, Feng said in a deep voice, "If this goes on, Swordsman will be exhausted to death by this swordsman." Immerse did not speak. Feng stared at Yi Xian and Swordsman not far away. Her right hand slowly clenched, and she was ready to attack at any time. Above buried Heaven City, the faces of the war army and the others softened when they saw this scene. Below the city wall, Yi Xian and Zhua Qing were already wrapped in sword flashes. Within the sword flashes, a series of explosions sounded continuously. Just like that, after about 15 minutes, a loud noise suddenly sounded from within the sword flashes. Immediately after, the sword flashes exploded, and Yi Xian and Zhua Qing were separated. Just as Yi Xian retreated, a ray of sword flashed through Zhua Qing's throat. Chi! Zhua Qing's head fell directly. Everyone stared at Zhua Qing. Soon, under everyone's gaze, Zhua Qing actually grew a new head. Seeing this scene, the faces of the war army and the others suddenly became extremely ugly. She really could not be killed. Yi Xian stood quietly with his sword in hand. He was also covered in injuries, but he was not as terrifying as Zhua Qing, and his injuries would heal on their own. In the distance, Zhua Qing slowly clenched his fists, and the surrounding spiritual energy began to gather toward him. Soon, the surrounding space and ground began to tremble. Zhua Qing stared at Yi Xian. "You can't kill me." As soon as he said that, he slowly raised his right hand. In an instant, the surrounding spiritual energy swept toward Yi Xian like a river. Not far away, Yi Xian stood quietly. Suddenly, the space Dao law quietly condensed between his brows. The next moment, under his control, the surrounding space began to collapse and annihilate inch by inch. Along with the collapse and annihilation, the surrounding spiritual energy also collapsed and annihilated, destroying the spiritual energy. Seeing this scene, Mo Xia's expression changed. Ah Feng was about to attack when Mo Xia glanced at her expressionlessly. "They're fighting one-on-one, a fair duel." Ah Feng's expression was a little ugly. "Are we just going to watch?" Mo Xia said softly, "He can die, but he can't lose face." Ah Feng suddenly said angrily, "I don't care. He's our friend. I can't watch him die." As soon as she said that, she rushed out. Mo Xia frowned slightly. At this moment, Feng suddenly stopped not far away. He turned his head abruptly and saw a long saber cutting through the air from his right. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.